To Love During War, Book 3 in the Sweet Regency Tales series, by Joanne Wadsworth. Narrated by Catherine Bilson. A child is born. 27 years earlier, alongside a stream at Cale Water, Scottish borders, 1783. The forest rose high and lush alongside this peaceful stream winding along the English-Scottish border. Una wandered through the long grass, her fingertips brushing the soft seedy tips waving in the gentle breeze. She'd walked this remote and wild forest path every day for the past 30 years of her life, this sacred land belonging to her Scottish ancestors, who legend said held a touch of fairy blood. Birds twittered from the treetops, sweet music to her ears, while the sun speckled through the thick canopy overhead and warmed the rich soil under her feet. Water burbled in the stream, and a frog croaked and hopped across the marshy bank. It splashed into the reeds and disappeared within the stalky shoots. The beautiful and tranquil sounds of nature brought her such comfort and joy, this place where she lived a slice of heaven on earth. Across the other side of the stream, her quaint cottage sat in a meadow surrounded by wildflowers waving their dainty heads in an array of pretty rainbow colours. The cottage had been her home since childhood, a place where she had lived alone following the passing of her beloved parents 7 years past. As she neared the old footbridge which arched over the stream, the wind rose, and her red tartan skirts flapped about her legs. Reaching out with her healer's senses, she lowered to a crouch and pressed her palm against the rich and earthy soil underfoot. Ever since her youngest years, she'd been able to sense things in the most profound way. Her mother had said she'd been bestowed with a wondrous healing gift, and must use it to aid and heal others wherever and whenever she could. She'd spent her life doing exactly that. "Is all well?" She gasped and jerked upright. A man now stood on her footbridge. He had dark hair streaked with a touch of silver either side of his head. In polished black boots, he waited in the centre where it curved higher. Deep smile lines were etched around his eyes, kind eyes. She relaxed. "You frightened me." "My apologies. I didn't mean to catch you by surprise." Gingerly, he pushed round-rimmed spectacles higher on his nose. "Aye, it is a surprise to see another here." She sent her senses flaring out, and detected his gentle and generous soul. "What is your name, sir?" "Professor Charles Chalmers. It's a delight to make your acquaintance, madam." He removed his woolen greatcoat and draped it over his arm. "May I ask what your name is?" "Everyone calls me Una. You may do so too. What brings you here to my meadow?" "A wheel broke on my carriage a little farther down the road. My driver is attending to the repairs." He glanced toward her cottage across the meadow. "Your home, I take it?" "Aye, it is." A soft mewl sounded from within the reeds, and she frowned at the strange noise. It wasn't one she'd ever heard down here before by her gently flowing stream. Another mewl, followed by a frog's croak. She stepped closer to the marshy bank, and the frog reappeared from within the stalks, its webbed feet flattening a few of the reeds. Behind the frog, something else came into sight. Oh my, a padded basket! It must have gotten caught within the reeds. Not that she'd ever discovered a basket in her stream before. How unusual! She edged closer, and shock pummeled through her. Within the basket, tufts of golden hair fluttered upon the sweet head of a newborn child. The baby's tiny arms flayed as the wee one let out a sudden cry. "Good grief! Is that a child?" The professor dropped his greatcoat and rushed over the footbridge. He hurried to her side and muttered, "I'll go in and fetch the baby." "Please be careful. The bank and reeds are quite swampy. You must take care not to overturn the basket." "Will do. I'll take all care." With his boots sinking into the rushes, he got bogged down a little in the slush, but he managed to reach out and scoop the basket clear of the reeds. He heaved back up onto the grass beside her, the basket cradled protectively in his arms. "Let me see if the child is well. I'm a healer." "Please do." With an anxious expression, he laid the basket on the ground, and they both hunkered around it. The baby was wrapped in a swaddling cloth, although the child had managed to free its arms. Gently she unwrapped the cloth, and the wee girl kicked her chubby legs and gurgled with a sweet smile. "Well, hello, little one." Smiling, she laid a hand upon the baby's wee chest, the girl-child's heart beating with lively strength. She appeared healthy, her cheeks a soft pink, and her cherub mouth curved, her eyes a rich shade of brown that twinkled with merriment. "You seem happy to be found, hm?" An answering gurgle. How incredible! Such wonder filled the professor's eyes as he touched a finger to the baby's dimpled chin. The child grasped his finger and pulled it toward her mouth. She suckled on the tip, and he beamed. "You appear hungry, although you won't find much sustenance from my finger." "She cannot have been here long, otherwise she would have been crying a storm by now." She touched the backs of her fingers to the baby's warm cheek. "Who do you think she belongs to?" the professor asked her, one brow quirked. "I've no idea." She studied the child. "There is no lass in the nearest village who has recently given birth." "You think she might have been abandoned?" He frowned and issued a low growl, clearly considering that thought intolerable. It certainly was to her. "Well, since she has been placed in a basket and set afloat on this stream, I would say aye. This stream connects to a river which runs for some distance either side of the Scottish borders. The child could even be from far beyond the nearest village, although it is doubtful the basket would have travelled that far without mishap." "I agree." The infant cooed at the professor with her beautiful golden eyelashes fluttering, and the professor cooed right back at her. "Una, she is so small and needs a family." "Aye, except I cannot possibly care for her. No one am so often called away to heal others. I will need to take her to the vicar and see if he can find her a home." "No." A stern word, followed by a smile as he kissed the baby's forehead. "I mean, if she needs a family, then I shall raise her as mine, although I'll be sure to ask about her within the nearest villages first, to see if she belongs to anyone." "You would do that? Adopt her as if she were your own child?" "Absolutely. I have no family to speak of, and would adore raising this wee one." Another soft mewl from the child, and the professor swaddled her back up in the cloth, lifted her from the basket, and as he stood, he tucked the child close to his chest and rocked her next to his heart. "Are you certain?" she asked as she rose to her feet. "I've never been more certain in my life." A firm nod from the professor. "She is no longer lost, but now found." "Then allow me to be there for her when she needs a woman's guidance in her life." She wasn't the child's mother, could never take that place in the child's life, but she would make a wonderful friend as the child grew into adulthood. She would teach this wee lass all she could. "Then she will have every advantage possible. We shall both ensure it." "Aye, we shall." With a beaming smile, all felt right in the world again. Chapter 1. St. Vincent's Fort, English garrison of 2,200 men, situated along the first line of Torres Vedras, Portugal, October 1810. Major Harry Trentbury marched along the passageway of St. Vincent's Fort toward the war room on the upper floor, where he'd been called to a meeting with Lord Wellington. An unexpected meeting, although unexpected meetings occurred constantly when a war raged. He rounded the corner and strode upstairs, and joined Wellington, who stood at the open door in his red regimental jacket, embroidered with gold thread on the high collar and cuffs. "Commander," he dipped his head. "My apologies for being late." "You're not late at all, Major. Professor Chalmers and Captain Antares Bourbon have not long arrived." Wellington gestured him inside. "Bourbon requested the meeting, although we haven't yet started, so please, be at ease." He stepped through the door, and his commander closed it with a quiet snick. At the round table which could accommodate 12, only 2 men sat. Before taking his seat, Harry clasped the professor's black-jacketed shoulder, the older man a mentor he held in great esteem. Then he eased down next to Bourbon, a comrade and treasured friend who currently wore what he called Bourbon's pirate attire, which suited the captain of the Cobra perfectly, since he sailed the seas alongside Portugal's western coastline in the ruse of pirating. Their English warships left the captain and his notorious vessel alone, since they fought on the same side in this atrocious war, which allowed Bourbon to patrol the nearby coastline and ensure the French didn't sneak past their defences via the sea. "It's good to see you, Bourbon. How are you?" "As good as can be during these difficult days, amico mio." Bourbon shook his hand, the man close to him in age, although with wisdom shining in the captain's eyes which added years to his commanding stature. "Let's begin our meeting. Across from Harry, Wellington rested his elbows on the polished tabletop. "What have you come to speak to us about this night, Bourbon?" "As you requested, I've managed to successfully place a man inside Massena's encampment, one of my trusted crew who speaks fluent French and can easily pass for a French soldier." "Excellent news." Wellington's eyes lit up. "Do continue. I want to hear everything you can share about our enemy." "I can confirm that Massena, Napoleon's right-hand man, is now planning an aggressive attack. Massena intends on striking somewhere along this central landline of the peninsula within the next 10 days. 10 days? I see." Brows drawing together, Wellington tapped the tabletop. "I'm not exactly surprised by that news, but I had hoped for a little more time before Massena initiated another attack." "What are your orders?" Bourbon asked their commander. "Keep a close eye on any continuing developments, and send further word as soon as you receive it. Utilize the signal stations. They now reach all the way across the land to the sea, and messages are being transmitted directly along the lines of Torres Vedras at a rapid pace." Wellington lobbed a look at the professor, one brow lifted. "Except you mentioned this morning that a slight issue still remained at the signal station in Sobral. Is all in order there now?" "It's a very slight issue. The messages faltering for a minute or two longer than they should." The professor tugged on the hem of his blue waistcoat. "Fletcher, your chief engineer, has asked that I correct the delay as soon as possible. I've assigned my duties to another engineer here, so that I might leave for Sobral early tomorrow morning." "Good. I would appreciate hearing about your progress when it's made." A stern nod from Wellington. "Send word to me once all is in proper order, directly to Perro Negro if you will. I'll be leaving here tomorrow, midday or thereabouts, and returning to my headquarters there." "Consider it done, my lord." The professor cast his gaze to Bourbon. "Does your man in Massena's camp know if the French have yet learned about our 3 lines of Torres Vedras being constructed? Either the first, second, or the third line?" "The French know nothing as yet." With a satisfied nod, Bourbon rolled his white shirt-sleeves to his elbows, exposing the dirks sheathed at each of his wrists. "Suffice to say, though, I'm not looking forward to when Massena does discover the lines." Neither was Harry looking forward to that moment, except the news of their fortified lines would surely reach the French sooner or later. How could it not, when each of the 3 lines of redoubts, trenches, and garrisons had been constructed by their engineers, lines which now spanned the entire width of the Portuguese peninsula? Close to 25 miles in distance for the first line, while the second line ran a little farther to the south for 22 miles. The third line sat much closer to Lisbon, and ran for 2 very powerful miles in distance, that would cover for an embarkation if it became necessary. Wellington breathed deep, his nostrils flaring. "We must make certain Massena remains without any knowledge of the lines for as long as possible. My intention is for these lines to remain our secret weapon, and for them to ensure Massena's complete downfall. The French cannot be permitted to take Portugal. Si will never allow Portugal to fall to the French." Bourbon's accent rose as his emotions did. The captain spoke several languages with fluent ease, often intermingling Italian and Portuguese, Spanish and Sicilian. Which country the captain came from, though, Harry didn't quite know, and Bourbon hadn't enlightened him in the 4 years he'd known him. "Is there any further information anyone wishes to share?" Wellington glanced at each of them in turn, and when they all shook their heads, their commander rose and gave them all a nod. "Gentlemen, on that note, I wish you all a pleasant evening." Wellington departed the room, and the professor followed him. Harry stood, as did Bourbon, who removed a thick piece of folded paper from the pocket of his black breeches, and handed it to him. "I wanted to pass this along to you in private," Bourbon murmured. "A letter from your fratello, whom I had the chance of visiting not long ago. My apologies. I had forgotten I had the note on me, and should have given it to you sooner." "Any letter is appreciated, no matter how long it takes to get to me. When you last saw my brother, how was he?" He accepted the letter and turned it over. Indeed, it was from his brother, the seal stamped with Winterly's crest. Drat, but it had been far too long since he'd last seen his brother, well over a year. Not that he didn't think about his loved ones every single day, or read their letters repeatedly every night. He missed them terribly. "He is very well, as are your mamma and sisters. Olivia, though, is frustrating him." "My youngest sister always has. In what way is she frustrating my brother at present?" I loaned her one of my personal items, an earring. That seems to have caused a great fuss." Bourbon tapped his ear where a large diamond usually glittered. "It is a long story how that came about, but Olivia has had my diamond earring set into a necklace which she now wears. It is irritating your brother, since no lady should accept jewellery from any man other than her husband. I am not, of course, her husband. I also have no intention of requesting the jewel be returned when it adorns the neck of an angel." A grin lifted his lips. "Un bellissimo angelo." He knew his sister well, and she would have found the captain an interesting enigma, thus why she would have taken the diamond and had the jewel set into a necklace. "There is something you are not telling me, though, Captain. Do you have tender feelings for Olivia?" "Unfortunately, I am meant for no woman." Bourbon clasped his arm and waved as he strode from the room. Bourbon was an enigma, one he truly wished to uncover more about. It seemed, perhaps, Olivia did too. Otherwise, why would she be tugging on the tail of the cobra? Harry crossed to the window overlooking the inner courtyard and slid the letter into his regimental shirt pocket. He would read it soon, in his chamber before he closed his eyes for the night. For now he waited, his gaze on the infirmary building across the other side of the courtyard. Long minutes passed before the door finally opened, and Miss Julia Chalmers stepped outside, her shift in the infirmary done for the night. 3 days of the week the professor's daughter aided Una and the doctors as they cared for their wounded soldiers. The rest of the week she aided her father, her love of engineering as strong as Harry's own love was for it. She strolled across the gravelly yard, and in the centre raised her arms and twirled about, her burgundy skirts flaring, and her white silk blouse glowing a golden hue under the moonlight. Her blonde locks streamed past her shoulders. Drat it all! She was so captivating. What had caused her such sudden delight this night? The woman was certainly an anomaly, an annoyingly beautiful and exasperatingly clever woman who continually spiked his interest and his desire. She constantly tugged on his tail, causing his protective urges to rise far more than they ever had with any other woman. She presented a challenge, one he couldn't resist. A challenge he had no intention of resisting tonight. He snuck downstairs. Chapter 2. Taking in the beauty of the night, Miss Julia Chalmers twirled about in the inner courtyard, the night sky having darkened to an endless midnight blue with a glittering array of stars. High above, a shooting star whizzed across in a wide arc, then it disappeared on the other side of the barbican where the fort's guardsmen patrolled. She closed her eyes and made a wish upon it, as Una had taught her as a child. "You appear lost in thought." Major Trentbury pushed off the curtain wall, emerging from the shadows. "I didn't notice you there." "I noticed you." A grin as he strolled toward her. "What has you smiling this night?" "I was making a wish. Did you see the shooting star?" Grasping her burgundy skirts, she swished up to him, and without fail, whenever she got this close to the man, her traitorous heart skipped a dratted beat. Goodness, but he appeared so wickedly delicious tonight, his blonde head tilted at a rakish angle, and his amber eyes glinting a reddish gold. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face so handsomely beautiful it might have been carved by one of the greatest architects or sculptors of their time. He was also from a titled English family, and of far better blood than her, which was why she'd never attempted to take their friendly banter any deeper than she should. No, not with such a beguiling sight before me. He caught her hand and twirled her about. "Major, you are becoming far too familiar with me." With a pretend huff, she turned on her heel and marched toward the main entrance. She snuck inside and trod down the eerily dark passageway toward the west wing, where hers, father's, and Una's bedchambers were located. The Major's too, unfortunately. His bedchamber adjoined hers along the passageway. "Captain Anteros Bourbon was here earlier," he murmured from behind her, his booted footsteps echoing. "I'm aware. Anteros visited me and Una in the infirmary when he first arrived." "You and Anteros are rather close." "I've known him since I was a little girl." "How did you first meet him?" He set a proprietary hand at the small of her back as he came in alongside her. No one learns anything about Anteros unless he wishes to share that knowledge." "My question wasn't about him. It was about you." "It was about him, too." She passed a stone sculpture depicting a warrior at war, the light from a candle in a wall sconce flickering its soft light. Maybe one day I shall tell you. For now, though, all you need to know is that he is one of my dearest friends. Men don't keep ladies as friends. Well, this lady does. She reached her chamber, swept around, and confronted him with her arms crossed and one foot tapping the floor. Good night, Major. He caught a wayward strand of her golden hair and tucked it behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her lobe for a moment too long, before he suddenly straightened and clasped his hands behind his back. Clearing his throat and arching one brow, he said, "How is the man who was harmed at the cliffside excavation site?" "He is on the mend. Una and the doctor will continue to look after him." "Does he recall the accident?" "No, and he might never do so." "I see." A breeze whistled through from an open door somewhere farther down the passageway, the wind causing her to shiver. The Major shifted and blocked the breeze with his body, then released his clasped hands and rubbed her arms. "Are you cold?" "No, and would you please cease touching me?" "I can't help it. I tell myself not to, then I break my word every time. It's most aggravating, although perhaps if you weren't quite so alluring it would make things easier." He caught one of her hands, lifted it to his lips, and kissed the inside of her palm. "Good night, Miss Chalmers." Her heart lurched at his lingering kiss, at the way he continued to look deep into her eyes, at the way he didn't move even an inch toward his chamber door. "Why do you torment me so?" "It is you who torments me." Dipping his head closer, his voice got thicker, huskier. "You're beautiful and intelligent and fascinating. You draw me toward you as no other lady ever has, although if I'm being truthful, most of the time I'm doing my best not to throttle you. You're forever finding trouble." "I too hold the desire to throttle you." "You're also a wonderful conversationalist." "I am? In what way?" She itched to push the longer strands of his blonde hair away from his brow so she could see his eyes better. "Your understanding of the science of engineering is outstanding." "I'm a daughter taught at her father's knee. The fact that I understand engineering so well isn't any surprise at all." Footsteps tapped, and she searched the gloomy dark behind her. 6-year-old Otis appeared around the corner, with a 3-legged stool in one hand and a candle in the other. Beside them, he set the stool on the stone floor with a rattle, clambered up, and wobbled as he tried to set the candle into an empty holder, which would be impossible since the holder was gummed up with dried wax. "Let me help you, Otis." She swung the cook's son from the stool and settled the child back on his feet. "I've told you before to ask me for help when replacing the candles. The floor of these passageways can be uneven in places, and if you fall, you'll get hurt." "I couldn't find you, miss." Cheeks smeared with dirt and his big blue eyes wide, he handed her his candle. "Well, now you have found me." "Here, allow me to change the candle." Harry pinched it from her hand, and with his dagger, scooped the caked wax clear of the holder and slotted the new candle in. No stool required. Beaming, the boy heaved the stool into his arms and trotted away. "Well, Major, our conversation has been enlightening, as per usual, but my bed awaits me, and I'm—" More footsteps, a far heavier clomp like that of soldiers. "Drat it," the Major muttered, and opened her chamber door before dragging her inside and shutting it. "What on earth are you doing?" Flabbergasted, all she could do was stare at him. "I didn't want to be caught standing outside your chamber." "Your chamber is right next door. You could have continued on." "My apologies. I wasn't thinking as clearly as I should, which is your fault. You always muddle my mind when you're so close." He slid the bolt home and leaned one ear against the panelled wood. "Can you hear anything?" She touched his shoulder as she leaned one ear to the door too, her chamber cosy and warm since one of the maids had already lit her fire. "Whoever the men are, they've slowed their step." Her door handle suddenly rattled, and she jerked back a step, shocked that one of the soldiers at St. Vincent's would think to enter her chamber without knocking, or even enter at all. "Which chamber did you say belongs to the Chalmers, chit?" A gruff question from the other side of her door. "This one right here." Another rattle. "Maybe this is the Major's door. I could be wrong." Harry whispered in her ear. "That's Greaves and Rogers. Their voices are unmistakable. Have they pestered you before?" "No," she whispered back. "She gets me all hot and bothered. muttered Greaves from outside, his gravelly tone now unmistakable to her, too. "The lass has the lips of a sire and all full and plump. She'd make a fine tumble. Better than the doxies, I'd be willing to wager." Roger's sly voice all conceited and egotistical. "Maybe she's still with the healer. We'll find her tomorrow and see if she'll let us flip her skirts." She shuddered with disgust. "Not on my watch will that happen," the Major muttered under his breath, his hands fisted. She gripped his hands to keep him with her rather than having him storm out her door. They couldn't be found together, not alone like this, not in the middle of the night. Greaves and Rogers seemed to be done, and their footsteps continued on down the passageway. Once they'd faded away, she tried to calm the man beside her. "Major, none of the soldiers here at the fort, or the men housed in the encampment in the valley below, have ever trespassed at my door before." "I'll knock their heads together first thing in the morning." He thumped one fisted hand into the open palm of his other. "You're the professor's daughter, not one of the blasted camp wenches." "Major, no, you're not to go into battle for me. I'll ask Father to have a word with them. If you speak for me, it'll raise eyebrows, and likely not in a good way." She laid a staying hand on his arm, his bicep ridged and hard underneath her fingers. So deliciously hard. She smoothed up and down over the ridge, and butterflies stirred in her belly and whooshed all about. "Miss Chalmers?" he growled low under his breath. More butterflies. They swarmed now in number, making her lose a breath. Looking into his eyes, she struggled to regain the right momentum in her breathing again. This affliction wasn't acceptable. It was bad enough his closeness usually caused her heart to skip a dratted beat. Now butterflies? "Please, you can't touch me like that." Gently laying his hand over hers, he eased her fingers from his bicep, and with a gruff snort, stepped away. You're right. My apologies." Quick breaths in and out. Slower. She needed to breathe slower. Once she'd gotten her breathing back under control, she motioned to her door. "You should leave. I bid you a good night." "I can't leave, not yet." He lifted his hands. "Surely you know why." "Not particularly." "Until I'm assured those idiots don't return, I must remain right here. I won't allow your safety to be compromised." He moved away, pacing her chamber from wall to wall, until her four-poster bed caught his attention. Halting next to her bed, he eyed the cream bed-covers. The pattern on the covers had always reminded her of spring, when dainty little flowers dotted the meadow. He ran a hand over the covers, then touched the wine-coloured bed-curtains. He jerked back as if he'd burnt his hand on them. Swiping his fingers through his blonde hair, he tossed his locks into a dishevelled mess. "You appear very tense, sir." "I shouldn't be in your room." He stuck a finger under his royal blue neckcloth and tugged. "Don't you think it's a little too warm in here? Can we douse the fire?" "No." Dousing her fire would plunge her room into darkness. She didn't wish to be stuck in a dark room with him. "Why don't you remove your dolman?" she offered instead. "I'd rather not." "I don't want you fainting on my floor." "Men don't faint." "What do men do when they get too hot?" "They get unsteady legs, that's all." "Oh, I do apologize. Then I don't wish for you to get unsteady legs. Come now, I'll aid you in removing your dolman, since you seem so opposed to doing it yourself." Brushing her hands vigorously together, she stepped up to him, the fire at her back as she looked him in the eye. He appeared sceptical, but without another moment's hesitation, she began unfastening the buttons of his heavily embroidered regimental jacket. 1 button, 2, 3. The distinct silver braids crossing the front of his dolman ran in long lines with loops at the sides. With him dressed in his uniform, she had to take rather slow breaths, since there was nothing more invigorating than seeing him clothed in such fine garb. "Please." His throat worked hard as he swallowed. "Stop." "I'm almost there." She slid the last button free, then moved in behind him and eased his jacket from his shoulders. She folded it so it wouldn't crease, his fresh pine and spruce scent sweeping around her. Now, where could she put his jacket? Placing it on her bed seemed too personal, and there wasn't another spare surface. The corner chair held a box of her father's engineering journals. Her writing desk was cluttered with some of Una's herbs which she'd borrowed. Perhaps her nightstand would do. It held a volume she was currently reading, but no matter. She set his dolman on top of the red leather-bound book. "You smell nice," he suddenly muttered, the fire's glow flaring over his high cheeks and chiselled jaw. "So do you." "You don't need to return the compliment." "You're right. You stink." He chuckled, then slowly circled her, his gaze moving to her mouth. 7 years of service I've given for my country as a hussar, and in all that time I've never met anyone like you. Those men were right. You do have the lips of a siren, all full and plump, which make a man think sinful things. Which is why you shouldn't have removed my dolman. I'm thinking the worst thoughts right now." "Do you think I'd make a fine tumble too?" She likely shouldn't have said that, or halted his circling by stepping directly in his path. At times her spontaneity got her into trouble. Pressing one hand against his shirt front, she caught the fierce thumping of his heartbeat as it ricocheted against her palm. With the pulsing heat of her fire and his invigorating closeness, she felt a little faint herself. Unfortunately, she also felt emboldened. "Would I be better than the wenches?" "I've never bedded one of the wenches, so I couldn't rightfully say." "I thought all men took a tumble or two with one of the wenches." "Not this man." He leaned in, his gaze so intent. "How about we take this conversation back a few steps? We need to cease talking about your lips and wenches, and instead just try to be friends." "You told me men don't keep ladies as friends." "You told me that you do." He groaned, dunked his nose in her hair, and muttered, "I would like it immensely if you called me Harry." "Are you certain?" "I'm standing in your bedchamber with the door bolted, so yes, please call me Harry." "You have a very valid point, Harry." She acknowledged his first name with a smile. "Please call me Julia." "Julia." He suddenly slid his hands around her waist and leaned her back, until she had to grasp his arms or else topple over. With his lips a mere whisper from hers, he murmured, "That is the most beautiful name I've ever heard. Say yes." "To which question?" Her heart was about to leap from her chest. "To accepting my kiss, my precious siren." "That could lead us down a very dangerous path." "Or a very enlightening one." "Dangerous is more likely." "You adore danger." "I actually do." She couldn't dispute that fact, not when she had followed her father into Portugal, into the midst of a war zone, and would follow him into any battlefield he entered. Life didn't get interesting unless there was a little danger involved, and this man was dangerous. Chapter 3. The lady in Harry's arms pursed her lips in thought as the golden red light from the fire flickered in her brown eyes. He wanted her to say yes to accepting his kiss. Surely a single kiss couldn't harm either of them. "Julia, I wish you could feel what you do to me." "I believe I already know what I do to you. My hips are pressed rather closely against your hips." Her eyes twinkled with merriment. "Harry, my answer is yes. To the kiss, that is. Let's be dangerous together for a moment in time." "Thank the merciful heavens for your agreement." He scooped her closer. "Oh my, we are getting rather close." She hooked her arms around his neck, pressed her lips to his throat and licked his flesh. Actually licked him. You taste as good as you smell." "I'm a rake for entering your bedchamber without your permission, and not a gentleman at all for touching you as I currently am." He stuck his nose in her hair again, kissed her ear, and traced his tongue along the soft indent of her lobe. "Tell me to stop." "Please don't stop." She clutched a hold of him tighter, her knees buckling. "Harry!" "I've got you." He caught her up in his arms and walked her backward. He pressed her against the panelled wall, and with her braced in place, he gave in to his raging desire and kissed her. He swept his tongue between her lips and licked across her tongue. Then, when she gasped and opened her mouth, he sucked her bottom lip between his lips and nipped her soft flesh. "I want to devour you, Julia." "Oh, I have an admission," she whispered breathlessly against his lips. "Tell me." "I've actually dreamed of kissing you." "Perfect. Let's kiss again, then, shall we?" He wrapped one hand around her neck, her skin so smooth under his fingertips, and gently he stroked down the long column of her throat. Raging with a heated desire he couldn't tamp down, he captured her mouth with his, and gave himself over to the passion flaring through him. He ravished her mouth, kissing her deeply, then softly, then deeply again until her lips were delectably swollen, and his heart thumped like a madman's. When he finally found the strength to pull back an inch, he muttered, "Never have I wanted to bed a woman as much as I currently want to bed you." "I'm terribly inexperienced, I'm afraid." Cupping his cheeks in her hands, she touched her mouth to his mouth, then softly traced the tip of her tongue along his lower lip, to the corner, then up and over his upper lip, her breath catching as she learnt the full shape of his lips. Blood rushed through his body, and he buried his hands in her silky golden locks, every inch of her hot and curvy length swaying against his length as he claimed her mouth in the way he needed to. "I want you, quite desperately." "The feeling is mutual." She clung to him. "We are being outrageously outrageous." "More like scandalously scandalous, and you're making me forget my good intentions. All I asked for was a kiss. I should release you." "I like this rough and wild side of you. It matches the irritating and maddening side quite nicely." Over top of his regimental shirt, she pressed her palm against his abs and circled her fingers over the indents. "You're right, though. You should release me." "Yes, I must." He forced himself to let go of her, then fisted his hands so he wouldn't grab her again, and instead pressed his knuckles into the wall either side of her head. Something dislodged and the wooden panels moved. A door swung open, and he barely caught Julia around the waist before she stumbled into the adjacent room. His room. She gasped as she eyed his chamber. "Oh, goodness, we have an interconnecting door between our rooms. A secret interconnecting door." Shocked, he snatched a candle from her bedside, lit it from the flames in her hearth, and walked into the darkened depths of his chamber. Carefully, he set the candle in the holder on the oak mantelpiece above his fireplace. "All these months! Oh, I had no idea." She wandered about, stepping past his canopied bed, with its thick gold-and-blue striped bed curtains edged in golden tasselled ties. 2 plump white pillows were propped against the headboard, the blue covers upon the bed straightened each day by the maid who serviced this wing. She strolled across to his oak side-table, and traced a finger along the embroidered hussar saddlecloth which he'd left out. "I should put that away." He collected the shabraque, rolled it, and placed it on a shelf in his wardrobe. "This is a beautiful engraving." While he'd had his head in the wardrobe, she'd ambled over to his trunk propped against one wall, her gaze caught on the wild horses engraved into the lid. Onto her knees she lowered, and with the gentlest touch, stroked the pattern etched into the rich red wood. "Stunning! Who carved this piece?" "My papa. He enjoyed whittling away at wood, a hobby he used to say, but he was incredibly good at it. A hobby he enjoyed himself, the little wooden statues of animals inside the trunk carved by his own hand. He passed away 5 years ago, 2 years after I joined the 18th Royal Hussars." "I'm so sorry." She ducked her head and sniffed, then lifted her gaze back to his, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Don't cry." He lowered to a crouch beside her. "Please, don't cry." "It always saddens me when I hear of someone's father passing away. I treasure my own father so much, and would simply die if he ever died. He's all I have in this world." "You have Jamie, too." Had she forgotten about her younger brother? "Yes, of course I do." She blinked a few times and forced her unshed tears away. "My brother isn't always around, though. He flitters all about the fort, and I can hardly ever keep track of him. Una is family, too. I would have her if I ever lost my father. I know that for certain." "How did Una come to be such a close friend of your family's?" A question he'd often wanted to ask, but never dared to ask since it was of such a personal nature. "I don't talk about how that came about." He should let the question go. It wasn't his business anyway, although he desperately wished to know more about her, to know her better. Huffing, he stood and removed the letter Bourbon had handed him in the war room from his brother, and slotted it under the leather case bulging with all his letters from home, right on his nightstand next to his bed, where he could read it before closing his eyes for the night. "Is that another letter from home?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "Yes." He caught her hands, aided her from her knees back to her feet. "I must admit that I'm slightly jealous of the number of letters you receive." You surely get them too? No, I have no other family. No grandparents, cousins, or relatives to speak of. She searched his gaze. It must be wonderful to have such treasured items to keep, this trunk and your letters. Tell me more about your papa. What was he like? Firm yet loving, strong of mind and character, yet he had a huge heart. He loved his family, was devoted to us. He also led by example, always fighting for what was right in our world. Your father actually reminds me of him a great deal. My father has a heart of pure gold. She beamed, happiness bubbling in her eyes. There is no one I look up to more. He is a fine example of a man, one to be imitated for certain. Thank you for saying so. I'm only speaking the truth. Since he'd now returned to his chamber, he crossed to his door and bolted it for the night. Although what should he do about the lady still within his room? Leaning back against the heavy wooden door, he couldn't help but smile. Well, at least no one saw me leaving your chamber and returning to mine. True, very true. Smiling in return, she swished to his narrow window and opened the wooden shutters. His chamber overlooked the training yard and the arched entrance gate leading into the fort. She breathed in the fresh night air, and a light wind blew her hair about her face, her white blouse lit gold by the moonlight. Needing to be closer to her, he couldn't help but silently close the distance between them, and at her back he swept her tresses over one shoulder and breathed in her sweet vanilla and cream fragrance. So terribly tempting. Her aroma swirled seductively around him, or perhaps that was the woman herself. She beguiled him, entranced him, her ripe curves calling to him. Before he could stop himself or think better, he skimmed his hand over her hip and rested his fingers on the flatness of her belly. A surge of need burned through him, utter madness taking him. He nipped her ear and whispered her name just to hear it on his own lips. Julia. Yes? Leaning back against him, she lifted and curled one arm around his neck. I want to kiss you again. That would be entering dangerous territory once more. Very dangerous. Yet also rather thrilling. She turned in his arms, gazed into his eyes. How old are you, Julia? 27, a rather decrepit age. That's not decrepit. You're only 2 years younger than I am. Ladies my age are considered spinsters. A teasing smile lifted her lips. Do you have a lady at home awaiting your return? I'm currently unattached, although there is a lady my sisters have decreed would be a good match for me, or so they say in their letters. I've yet to meet this lady, though. What is her name? Lady Amelia Evergreen. She has recently come of age, is the niece of a dowager duchess. Every man has the desire to wed, doesn't he? She asked him. To have children, to continue living even though this war rages on. Do you? Of course. He stroked her nape and she arched her back. I like it when you touch me. She caressed his arms, her touch soothing him deep within. When you decide to wed, will you sell your commission and retire from the hussars, or will you continue pursuing an advancement through the ranks? I'd prefer to sell my commission, settle down and purchase property, perhaps a residence in the country with wide-open fields and a workshop. A dream he intended to ensure came to full fruition one day. My father and I live in the English countryside, about a day's ride from the Scottish borders where Una has her cottage. She licked her lower lip, and he wanted to lick it himself, then suck on it. What dreams do you wish to pursue on this property you intend to purchase? My dream would be to explore a few engineering projects that I have in mind, in particular steam-driven engines. One day travel by iron rail could become our nation's preferred choice of travel, and I wish to be at the forefront of such a revolutionary new move. Gently, he smoothed his knuckles across her soft cheeks. What of you? What are your dreams? All I can think about right now is kissing you. She touched a finger to his lower lip. It feels as if I'm standing on the edge of a cliff and about to plunge over it. It is both scary and invigorating, but if I don't take that plunge, then I might regret doing so for the rest of my life. What kind of regret do you mean? There is an emptiness inside of me. I'm ready to embrace my spinsterhood, but I wouldn't mind a deeper moment with a man where I don't have to think about who I truly am, or where I've come from. Where have you come from? That's a secret. She smiled and tipped her head to the side. Would you ever consider one night with someone like me? Holding me, enjoying a deeper friendship where we might kiss, without, of course, any further expectation involved. I simply wish to experience more than what I have. What if I want more than one night of holding you? How long would be agreeable? A month. Then, sir, you're surely expecting more than what I'm offering. No, I'm not. He kissed the tip of her nose. But like you, there is an emptiness inside of me as well. This is a dreadful war, and I've lost countless comrades and friends. It would soothe my soul to be able to rest my head at night on my pillow and have someone else to talk to before I fell asleep, with a woman such as yourself who understands the ravages of this war, and all it entails. I see. She frowned. Still, a month is a long time considering how close the French are. They are bearing down on us with swift speed. I would like to counter your offer. Go right ahead. 1 week. 2. He scooped her up and dropped her onto his bed. She bounced with a giggle, so he slid in over top of her and took her mouth in a heady kiss. He twined their tongues and devoured her, until they both hatched a break for some much-needed air. Oh, my! She fluttered a hand over her heart. How about we agree to holding on to each other for however long we have until you're called into battle? That is a very sensible and realistic offer. He'd never be able to walk away from her heartfelt offer either. She'd captivated him the first day he'd arrived here 6 months ago, and he longed for someone special like her in his life, particularly during these difficult days of warring. Nodding, he said, You have yourself a knightly companion, until I'm called into battle. Thank you, and if you wish to change your mind, you need only say so. I'm not changing it. What about you? He tucked her against his side and closed his eyes as he waited for her answer. I'm not changing my mind either, she whispered in his ear, and closed her own eyes. Good night, Harry. Good night, Julia. He settled down for the night, the most perfect night in 7 long years. Bliss. Holding her was pure bliss. Chapter 4. Julia rubbed her knuckles into her gritty eyes filled with sleep. She stretched and... Oh, she flung her eyes open. She was in Harry's chamber, his leg draped across her lower body, his arm slung over her skirted waist and his nose in her hair. Their conversation of last night came crashing back, and goodness, he'd agreed to a deeper friendship with her until he rode into battle. Her Adonis with his beautiful sculpted face and muscled body had promised to offer her a few nights of joint companionship. How had she gotten so lucky? Particularly when he was from a level of society far above her own. She was a no-one in the grand scheme of things. No one even knew the Professor had adopted her as a baby, other than for Una and Anteros. Heat flushed through her, and slowly, so as not to awaken him, she pushed up onto her elbows and drank in the sight of him. A beam of sunlight streamed through his narrow window and played over his blonde hair and high cheeks. Stubble hazed his jaw, his chin sharply defined with a deep cleft in the centre. The rugged appeal of him had her leaning in and giving up on her pledge of allowing him to continue with his rest. She kissed the delectable indent, then nibbled along his bottom lip. His breathing halted, then started again, but other than that he showed no further outward signs of having awoken, even though he clearly had. She teased a finger along his brow and down his straight nose. "Do you intend to sleep the day away, my hussar?" "I'm not moving from this bed while there is a lovely lady still in it." Leisurely he opened his eyes, his amber gaze blazing a whisky-golden hue. A lady who I wouldn't mind stealing a kiss or two from." "Please, go right ahead." "You make the perfect nightly companion." He swept her back onto her back and loomed over her, his hands trapping her hands to the bed, a devouring look blazing in his eyes. "I want to eat you." She giggled. "Kisses only." A horn echoed through the open window from the training yard, and Harry groaned. "Are you leading the training this morning?" He usually did on Wednesdays, and today was indeed Wednesday. He nibbled away on the skin of her neck. "Yes, unfortunately." "Your men will be expecting you. I understand that you must go." She'd never keep him from doing his duty. Will I see you tonight?" "You surely will, and I apologise profusely for abandoning you so early in the morning." He heaved himself out of bed, caught her hand, and gently drew her to her feet. After steering her back into her chamber, he eyed his regimental jacket where she'd left it folded on top of the book on her nightstand. A slow smile lifted his lips, his gaze tipping toward hers. "It all began with you removing my dolman." "No, it all began 6 months ago, when you rode into St. Vincent's. I've fancied you since the beginning." She collected his jacket and held it out to him, and he accepted it, his fingers sliding sensually over the back of her fingers. Her hand tingled, her flesh so sensitive to his touch. "Do you remember the first day we met, Harry?" "Always. You scolded me terribly." "I had every right to. You raced across the firing range and dived on top of me. We rolled quite the distance, and you ruined my blue skirts. I had to toss my favourite white blouse away, too." "You could have been hit by cannon fire." "I hadn't intended on crossing the actual cannon firing range, only skimming the outside." "It didn't appear that way to me." He touched his chest. "My heart hasn't beaten the same way ever since." "Neither has mine." That much she could certainly admit to. A smile as he retreated to their secret connecting door. "By the way, before I leave, I need to speak to you about how my meeting with Wellington, Bourbon, and your father went last evening." "Oh, please do." Father always updated her after such meetings, but she hadn't seen him as yet. "Bourbon had one of his men infiltrate Massena's camp. He brought word that the French intend on striking somewhere along this peninsula within the next 10 days. With that being the case, you're not permitted to leave this fort, not while our enemy is so close." "You are not my commanding officer." He had a terrible tendency to order her about, and she'd told him off each and every time. Today would be no exception. "No, but we're closer now, and I don't want you getting hurt. I care about you." With a quick salute, he closed their connecting door behind him. "We'll speak further tonight," he issued through the wall. "Harry, wait!" She hadn't given him the right to oversee her every move, and she intended to ensure he knew that. She patted the panel, tried to find the blasted hidden latch, but couldn't. Good grief, it had to be somewhere along here. She patted and prodded the panels some more, but came up with nothing. Well, she wasn't abiding by his last demand, not when she could go where she pleased when dressed as Jamie. Ah, yes, Jamie. Her delightful younger brother was about to reappear. "Julia, are you there?" A knock rattled her chamber door, Una's voice floating through. "Yes, I'm coming." She'd find the latch later. For now, she scooted across the chilly floorboards, her fire having died out during the night, and not a single ember glowing in her hearth. She unbolted the door, and after Una stepped inside, shut it, and hugged one of her favourite people in the world. Una had always been in her life, their bond having grown over the years in unexplainable ways. The healer understood her as no one else did, had been there the day Father had pulled her out of the stream in a padded basket, right there beside Una's cottage. 27 years ago, destiny had decreed that she would have Father and Una in her life. She certainly wouldn't be alive today if not for them. "Oh, my dear child, pray tell, what has that distressed look on your face this fine morn?" Holding her shoulders, Una eased back an inch and inspected her with a look that meant business, where she pulled her brow down and slanted her eyes. "Who do I need to thump?" "Major Harry Trentbury." "What has that man done to you now?" "He is far too handsome for his own good." "Well, that is a fact one no woman can deny." A sure and consigning nod. "Tell me more." "I asked him for a single night of companionable friendship, where we might hold each other and kiss, with no expectation on my part in return." "You did?" Una's brow shot up, and a twinkle lit her eyes. "Continue, please. Dinna stop there. I am an old woman who enjoys listening to hearty tales such as this." "You are only in your late 50s. That is hardly old." "Shush, and tell me what he said." A puff of her cheeks before she released a berated breath. "He asked for more than one night, for a month. We then waged back and forth until we agreed on a more sensible amount of time, that which remains before the next battle begins. We both wish to have someone to talk to before we fall asleep, Someone who understands this awful war and all it entails. I understand. Una tapped her lower lip with one finger. Undeniably he's a handsome devil, and in my opinion he's always watched you like a hawk, and know as if you were his prey. Nay, he has shown only care for your safety, and whenever there is danger afoot, he ensures you remain here at the fort where no harm can befall you. I've always admired the man for his strength and honourable ways. Do you wish for more with him, other than what you've asked? No, I have no grand expectations of being accepted by his family. He is of the peerage, Una, while I am of rather questionable blood. There is also my age, which is an issue. No man wants a wife who is so close to 30. Pfft, you can marry at any age, and a child cannot choose who their parents are, as I've told you time and time again. With a swish of her kirtle's red skirts, Una circled her, assessing her from head to foot before she halted in front of her again. You wore those clothes yesterday. I slept in his bed last eve and haven't yet changed. What if you change your mind and wish for more? You must allow me to prepare a pouch of herbs for you. To keep me from getting with child? She'd aided Una in preparing herbs for the ladies in camp who had required them. The camp wenches, some of the maids who served in the fort, even one or two of the wives of the officers, who had no desire to bear a child while a war raged. Una never questioned their request, not when she believed that every woman had the right to choose their future path. One of the reasons why Una had never married herself was due to her desire to be the best healer she could be, to never have to turn away a patient who required her healing hand. Una had foregone the chance to wed and bear a child of her own. Yes, the herbs will provide the protection you need should either of you desire more than the platonic companionship you've spoken of. I realise you've chosen not to marry, to embrace spinsterhood, but in truth, my dear, you are just beginning your life. I shall leave the herbs you require in a pouch in your top dresser drawer. Swallow a pinch each morning, and continue doing so each day while you are gracing your major's bed. Now come. Una steered her towards her corner cheval mirror and stood her in front of it. Let's tidy your hair. Oh my! You should have warned me about how terrible I look. Her reflection showed her usually tidy hair now a tangled mess, as if some poor bird had tried to make a nest in it. She scooped the brush from the dresser and passed it to Una, who, smiling indulgently, worked at detangling the knots with careful strokes. I intend on taking Jamie's facade today, she informed Una. Is that because your father is riding to Sobral this morning? Una met her gaze in the mirror. Your father isn't happy with how the messages are being transferred through the signal station at Sobral. They falter a touch longer than they should, and his desire is to correct the issue. Father mentioned the issue to me a few days ago, but honestly, the reason for the disguise today is because Major Trentbury has decreed that I'm to stay here at the fort. Silly man. Ordering you about is akin to laying down a challenge. Una set the brush down and swished across to her wardrobe. She collected her bindings from the top shelf and held them out toward her. I wish I'd been as wily as you in my youth, creating a disguise such as this. You still could. She unbuttoned her white blouse and dropped it in the corner hamper, then accepted the bindings from Una and wrapped her breasts in the bindings until they lay flat against her chest, or as flat as they possibly could, since she had a decent-sized bosom. A tinge of pain flared as she confined her mounds, but she breathed past the pins and needles until the tinge eased sufficiently. You're right, I could, but I've no need to these days. Behind her, Una gently knotted the bindings in place. Where is father now? Wrinkled skirts unfastened, she shimmied on a pair of fawn breeches, belted them at her waist, then tugged a yellowed tunic, that had seen better days, over her head and laced the front ties. I left him in the hall, breaking his fast so I could come and find you. Have you eaten? She pulled her hair into a low ponytail, secured it with a strip of leather, and poked the tail back up underneath, right against her scalp. Not yet. The three of us shall eat together. Brown cap stuffed on her head, she opened a round tin from her dresser drawer, and added a few streaks of grimy coal dust to her jaw and a dab to her cheeks. Done, she turned, and with a ta-da, asked Una, How do I look? Like a most mischievous lad. Patting her silvery hair coiled high upon her head, Una beamed like a proud mother. You remind me so much of myself when I was your age. That is the greatest compliment I could ever receive." She bounced onto her toes, kissed Una's cheek, then tugged her socks on and jammed her feet inside her scuffed boots. "Where shall you be today?" "In the infirmary this morn. Then later this afternoon I'll be visiting the men in the encampment. So many of the soldiers ignore small wounds they might suffer from. Wounds that then fester and worsen when there is no need for such to—" Shouts sounded outside, and Una grasped her kirtled skirts and hurried to the window. "What's going on?" She raced after Una and opened the shutters. Sunshine poured in, a fresh breeze too, and the clear pounding of horses' hooves. A score of hussars galloped in from the 18th Regiment in their distinctive uniforms of royal blue, silver and white. They hauled their mounts to a stop before the stables, and the officer at the head of the group bounded from his destrier. Captain Bradley Poole, his golden locks cropped short and his bearing tall. She'd never mistake him, not when he had fought at Harry's side for years, and had visited St. Vincent's Fort often over these past 6 months that Harry had been stationed here. Poole tossed the reins of his warhorse to a stable hand who ran forward to take them, then gripping the hilt of his belted sabre, strode across the inner courtyard. She pressed a hand to her heart as Harry left the training yard where he currently supervised his men, and met Poole with a firm handshake. They spoke with their heads bent together, then they marched inside the main doors and entered the fort. "What do you think is happening?" she asked Una. "I'm not sure, but in order to find out we need to investigate." Una bustled to the door and glanced back at her with a furrowed brow. "Hurry up, my dear. This war waits for no man or woman." "I'm coming." She closed the door behind them, and keeping her stride lanky and long as a lad would, weaved her way through the passageways as Jamie, her 16-year-old younger brother who didn't actually exist. Thumbs poked into the waistband of her belted breeches, she sauntered into the main hall as the arriving hussars took their seats at the trestle tables, among the fort soldiers who were already breaking their fast with hot oats and fresh bread. From the far table, Father waved to her where he sat with his travelling satchel propped against his chair leg. Dusting her hands against the sides of her breeches, she scuffed her booted feet as she made her way around the perimeter of the room. Once she reached Father, she scraped out a chair for Una, then another chair for herself before taking her seat. "Are you leaving straight after you've eaten, Father?" "Una told you of my plans?" "She did." "Good. And yes, I am leaving rather soon." In his blue jacket donned over a dark shirt and trousers, he folded the journal he'd been reading and slotted it into his bag. With the tap of Father's spectacles higher on his nose, he peered at her as he leaned closer. "Why has Jamie resurfaced today?" "I simply wish for a little more freedom. I'll be careful, I promise." "That's fine, and I completely understand." Father tweaked her nose. "Will you be all right while I'm gone?" "Of course. I have Una." She accepted a bowl of oats from a serving maid, and thanked a second maid for pouring her and Una cups of tea. Una swirled honey over their oats, then added a splash of milk from the jug to their bowls. Slouching in her chair just as Jamie always did, she thanked Una and spooned a bite. The hot oats slid smoothly down her throat and warmth filled her belly. Delicious. Raising a brow at Father, she informed him, "Captain Poole has just arrived with the 18th. This fort is now bustling with more soldiers." "I'm not surprised Poole is here. There has been a great deal of unease along the front line, and many of our mounted troops are being repositioned closer to the forts. We must be prepared for a strike soon, which means I too mustn't dawdle since I need the signal station at Sobral working well. My apologies for not having more time this morning to speak to you, Jamie." "It's all right, Father. I understand your need to ride out as soon as possible. I would too if I was in your position. We can't allow our work here to falter now that we're so close to the completion of these lines." "Yes, my thoughts exactly, and thank you for understanding." Scraping his chair back, Father stood and dropped an affectionate kiss on the top of Una's head. "Take all care while I'm gone, Una. You are as dear to me as my daughter is." "It is you who needs to take all care, since you're riding towards Sobral. The French are camped far closer to the central pass than they are to this fort." Una grasped his arm, a warning look in her eyes. "I expect you to return promptly, otherwise I shall worry about you day and night. Send a message or two to keep us updated." "Duly noted." I don't expect the job to take much longer than 3 or 4 days, but if it does, I'll send word." Father slung his satchel onto his back and pressed a hand to Julia's shoulder. He tipped his head toward the door leading from the main hall. "Jamie, walk with me to the stables. I need to speak with you some more." "Of course." She plucked a wedge of cheese from the breadboard, stuffed an apple from the bowl into her pocket, and chased after Father, who'd already marched out the door. She picked up her pace, skidding through the front foyer and into the inner courtyard. Squinting at the bright sunshine, she loped up to Father where he waited near the stables. "Son," he murmured when she joined him, "please do not find any trouble while I'm gone." "I'll be on my best behaviour," she crossed her heart. "I promise." "Even though you are no longer a child, you will always be my child." He engulfed her in his arms and squeezed her until she almost ran out of breath. When he pulled back, he smiled. "The day I plucked you from amongst the reeds and held you in my arms, such love filled my heart." "I love you too, Father." Never could she have asked for such a wonderful man to claim her as his child. "I love you too, Father." Never could she have asked for such a wonderful man to claim her as his child. "You must cease worrying about me." "Unfortunately, I always shall." Another squeeze, and Father released her, before asking one of the stable lads to saddle him a horse. While he stood beside her waiting for his mount, he looped an arm over her shoulders and whispered, "Look after Una for me. She worries greatly whenever I leave the fort." "Will do, Father." Ducking her head, she sniffed, and quickly swiped 2 tears away as the stable lad returned with a horse. She always shed a tear or two whenever her father left for a few days. Father mounted up, dug his heels into his horse's flanks, and waved as he galloped through the heavily guarded main gate. His blue greatcoat flapped, the wind plastering his waistcoat to his chest. She bounded up the curved stairwell leading to the battlements, taking the stone steps 2 at a time. Then once she reached the top, she gripped the arrow loop. Father rode along the rutted road weaving through the craggy hills, the rugged countryside bathed in sunshine, the blue sky above holding a few wispy streaks of white cloud here and there. Along the horizon, abrupt peaks of bare grey rock rose high, and steep valleys dipped down low. This land could be wild and harsh and barren, yet it also held wind-swept wonders she'd adored uncovering during the years she'd lived here. 6 months of that time had been spent living with a dangerously handsome man in the chamber adjoining hers, a man she'd been intrigued with from the beginning, a man she intended on enjoying a few sweetly precious nights with. From her high perch on the battlements, she grinned to herself. Chapter 5. Harry strode down the passageway with Captain Poole, his gut gnawing in the most vicious way. Poole had met with Wellington, a meeting Harry had attended too. Wellington had given the order that their mounted troops be repositioned closer to the forts along the first line. The 18th Regiment had been recalled here to St. Vincent's, and would remain stationed within these walls until they learnt the French commander's exact target point along the peninsula. Wellington had now ridden for his headquarters at Perro Negro, but not before asking Harry to visit the smaller forts along the western coastline, to ensure all was readied for an attack. They had to be prepared along the entire 25-mile width of the first line for when the French advanced. Before he left, though, he needed to release some of the tension flowing through him. Patting his ever-present sabre strapped to his hip, he couldn't miss his friend's white-knuckled grip on his own sabre. Eyeing Poole as they entered the front foyer, he said, "It appears we both need to vent our frustration. I was leading a training session with my men before your arrival, but haven't had a chance to wield my own sword. Perhaps you'd care to join me in a sparring session of our own? Just the 2 of us." "Yes." Poole gritted his teeth. "It's been far too long since our last bout." "No restrictions, no restraints." He stepped outside the front door as Poole nodded his agreement. Across the other side of the inner courtyard, a cart rumbled through the main gate, and weary soldiers, their uniforms streaked with dirt and blood, jumped from the rear. Working in pairs, they carried their fellow wounded soldiers on stretchers into the infirmary. 2 stable lads harnessed fresh horses for the cart's return to the front line. The driver stacked sacks of oats onto the cart, while maids from the kitchens hurried across from the servants' entrance with loaves of fresh bread, baskets of vegetables, and piles of blankets. With the cart overflowing with provisions, the driver gripped the reins and drove back through the main gate under the portcullis. High on the battlements next to the gatehouse, Jamie Chalmers stood in fawn breeches and a yellowed tunic with a brown cap on his head. Julia's brother chatted to one of the guardsmen, who had a telescope raised to his eye as he surveyed the craggy mountains in the distance. "That's the professor's son, isn't it?" Poole asked from beside him. "Yes, Jamie. He's 16 and rather clever. He takes after his father with his love of engineering." "Is Miss Chalmers about?" "Why do you ask?" Harry snapped his gaze from Jamie back to Poole, his friend's tone far more suggestive than it needed to be. "I meant no offence with the question." Poole held up his hands. "Then what did you mean?" "Jamie's sister is a lady I quite admire. I realise she's not from our society, but she's intelligent, quick-witted, discerning in nature, and extremely alluring." Poole stroked his jaw, his gaze veering towards the infirmary. Poole's elder brother was a viscount, a man who'd already secured his heir and spare, his wife giving him 2 sons, which meant Poole could marry whomever he wished. "She is admirable." At present he was Winterly's heir until his brother married. He would have to take more care with whom he chose for his future bride. His family would expect him to marry a lady of distinction, or even an heiress, not that he needed the dowry either could offer him. Papa had left him a generous amount following his passing. Not only that, though, he'd earned a decent amount as a hussar and had invested his funds wisely. He had plenty to follow his dreams once he retired and sold his commission. Soon. He'd retire soon. He didn't wish to be fighting in this terrible war once he'd reached 30, an age awaiting him just around the corner. Poole continued to eye the infirmary as if hoping that Julia would soon emerge, then hummed under his breath before saying, "Miss Chalmers is splendid to look upon. I honestly wouldn't mind becoming better acquainted with her. Are you aware if she's a spinster?" "Pardon?" Poole startled and struck him a wide-eyed look. "She's a beauty and can't be more than 20. 27, actually." He growled low, and Poole seemed to notice his discontent, and drat it, his friend was now grinning. "Ah," Poole murmured with a sly nod. "Am I perhaps encroaching, treading where I shouldn't? Have you taken note of the lady's admirable qualities and are pursuing her yourself?" "No." A huff. "No." That didn't sound like an actual no, even though you said it twice. "Julia is everything you said, but she has chosen spinsterhood. I don't believe she intends to veer from that decision." Since you're calling her by her first name, I'd say there is something more going on between the two of you than you're willing to share." "Oh well, I'll simply have to search elsewhere for a lady." Poole slapped him on the shoulder and tipped his head toward the training yard. "Come, let's train." Training certainly beckoned. He walked with Poole toward the battling men, and once they found a clear spot, he slid his sabre free and faced his comrade. Poole had already planted his booted feet wide, his sword snug in his hand. His friend didn't hold back. With a quick flick of his blade, he attacked, thrusting his sword high, and Harry moved fast to block the fierce blow. For 20 minutes they fought hard, one strike after another, their blades clanging against each other's and sweat beading on their brows. The sun rose higher, and he slashed over and over, meeting each of his friend's strikes with a firm blow of counter-strikes. "I'd forgotten," he muttered as he swiped his forehead, "that you don't hold back when training. You're getting less practice since you're not currently out on the front line." Gaze glinting with firm determination, Poole sprang forward. "Remain on guard." Harry did, meeting each swing as they battled. As the other men in the yard completed their training sessions, they moved into a circle around him and Poole. From the sidelines, his fellow soldiers cheered both of them on. Invigorated, he slammed his blade into Poole's, and fought with one brutal blow after another until his friend suddenly grunted and fell back a step. Not for long, though. Poole bounded straight back into their fight, twirling his blade as he circled him. Another hard strike from Poole, then another, each of his friend's strategic blows coming from one side and then the other as he tried to weaken him. Time to change their positions. Rocking on his heels, Harry waited, and when Poole swung, he dropped low and rolled clear, his comrade's blade pinging off the dusty ground. His fellow soldiers cheered at his supreme move to turn the tables. "Major!" a lad shouted as he ran across the dusty yard, his hand on his brown cap atop his head, and the odd strand of golden hair poking out. "Stay back, Jamie." He cast one of the soldiers a glare. "Keep an eye on the boy." Poole struck his ribs with the flat of his blade, and sharp pain ricocheted through him. Grr, that'd serve him for losing his concentration. If he were on the battlefield, he'd be dead. Poole clicked his tongue at him. "Never allow anyone to steal your concentration, not even for a moment." "Captain Poole!" Jamie ducked under the soldier's arm and bounded onto Poole's back. The lad clung to the captain with his arms and legs wrapped tightly around him. "Jamie, get off me!" Poole laughed as he tried to dislodge the boy, thankfully finding the humour in the situation. "You're like a crab." "Thank you, sir." Jamie covered Poole's eyes. "I'll take that as a compliment." "I can't see a dratted thing now." More chuckles from Poole. "Yes, and you can't hit the Major since you can't see him." Poole half bent over with laughter. All right. I promise not to hurt the Major again." "Very good. The crab is releasing you." Jamie dropped to the ground, dust rising over the tips of his scuffed boots. The lad brushed his hands together with great satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. "Good grief, lad, you're going to make a fine hussar one day." Poole slid his blade away and saluted Jamie. "Once you turn 18, come and see me. I'll gladly take you under my wing." "You will?" Jamie smiled rather wide, looking extremely pleased. "Yes, Captain. I'll come and see you as soon as I can join the hussars." Harry would have snapped his displeasure at that. If anyone was to take Jamie under his wing, it'd be him. He sheathed his sabre and shook Poole's hand. "Your last move would have been a death blow. This session your win. I'm duly reminded to keep my attention on my opponent and not on any possible distraction. A very valuable lesson. You have my thanks, my friend." A nod as Poole released his hand. "Come with me, Jamie." He gripped the boy's shoulder and steered him back across the yard. "Are you mad at me, sir?" "Yes, you shouldn't have jumped on Poole's back. You could have gotten hurt." "You're the one who got hurt," the boy pointed out. "Not me." "Don't argue with me when I'm trying to prove a point." The boy was just like his sister, always arguing with him at every turn. "Where are we going?" "Down into the valley, to the main encampment." He marched through the postern gate, then strode down the hill toward the valley, where yellowish-white canvas tents were erected in uniform row after row. "Excellent!" Jamie half ran to keep up with him. "Then what are we doing?" "My duties today include riding out to the forts along the western coastline. Since you have a rather observant eye when it comes to the defensive forts, you can join me. First, though, I have an issue to deal with, or I should say 2 issues. Greaves and Rogers. They spoke ill words against your sister last eve, and now we're going to find them and knock their heads together." "You're worried that they might hurt her?" "No, not when I intend on making certain any such thought is driven completely and irretrievably from their minds." By chance, do you have a tendre for my sister, Major?" The lad stumbled, then righted himself as he tried to keep up with Harry's long strides. The boy's eyes the same striking honey-brown shade as his sister's. "No, she is simply an annoyance of the greatest sort." He had the worst tendre that any man had ever had for a woman. Not that he'd ever admit that to the lady's younger brother. "Speaking of your annoying sister, has she ever had a serious suitor?" "You'd have to ask her. That's a rather personal question, wouldn't you say?" Jamie wiped one finger smeared with coal dust on the side of his breeches. The boy had some strange ways about him. Whenever he saw Jamie, his face was smeared with coal dust. "Why do you always do that? Have a grimy face?" "Julia hates it when I get all grubby, and it's my job as her brother to annoy her at every possible turn." The boy burst into chuckles, his lips full, exactly like his sister's, his hair the same golden shade as well, or at least what he could see poking out from under his cap. They passed several men working in the trenches, fortifying them where needed, the land rolling in smooth undulations here as it flowed towards the south. With his curiosity regarding Julia burning deeper than ever, he asked Jamie, "Tell me something interesting about your sister, which very few people know." "She's fluent in several languages." The boy picked between 2 of his teeth. "Are you aware of that?" "No. Which ones?" He was aware she'd travelled extensively with a professor over the years, throughout all of Europe and farther afield across the seas, but he'd never heard her speak anything other than English. She speaks Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, French, Sicilian, and Latin. Are you certain? He wasn't aware of any lady who knew that many languages. Yes, sir. I speak them all too. That's astonishing. How did you both come to learn so many languages? From Captain Bourbon. You've both known him a while, correct? This might be his chance to uncover more about how Bourbon had met the Chalmers family. A chance he didn't intend on giving. Greaves and Rogers strutted toward him. Anger rose swift and sharp in his gut. Squeezing Jamie's shoulder, he muttered, "Stay here." Then he stormed toward the men he sought. One hand clenched, knuckles straining white. He slammed his fist into Greaves' belly, then swung at Rogers. Both men went down, gasping for air and clutching their middles. Palming the hilt of his sabre, he stood over them. "I will warn you both only once. If you dare to come within 50 feet of Miss Chalmers, I won't simply lay you both to the ground as I've done just now, but instead shoot you. I am a crack shot with my pistol. Do you understand?" "Yes, Major." A groan and nod from both men. "Obey my order, or else suffer the consequences." Before he pummeled them any further, he turned on his heel and marched toward the stables near a copse of trees at the edge of the encampment. "Good grief!" Jamie bounded in beside him, one hand over his mouth. "I wouldn't wish to upset you for any reason." "They won't bother your sister again, and that's all that matters." "Exactly how did they bother her?" "They tried to enter her chamber without her permission." "I see." The boy went silent. So did he. They passed 2 apron-clad women chopping vegetables and slabs of beef on a trestle table, the cooks tossing the vegetables and meat into large blackened pots which bubbled on the fire. The hearty aroma of beef stew wafted all around. He entered the area near the stables where a lanky-legged lad of perhaps 10, with loosely belted pants rolled at the hem, brushed a sleek brown warhorse with long and firm strokes. Across the dusty yard, another lad saddled a destrier for a soldier awaiting his mount. The soldier thanked the lad with a tussle of his messy hair, then hoisted himself into his saddle and galloped across the valley toward the north. "Saddle 2 mounts and be quick about it," he instructed the stable lad who was now free. "A destrier for me and a palfrey for the boy." "Right away, Major." The lad scurried inside the makeshift stables. As he awaited the lad, he leaned against a post, while Jamie plucked an apple from his pocket and climbed the corral railing and petted a horse. He fed the horse a wedge he bit out of the fruit, then took a bite for himself. A large hawk screeched as it soared overhead. Toward the edge of the tree line, men practiced with their rifles as they aimed their sights at a strip of white ribbon tied around a wide trunk 100 feet distant. Boom, boom, boom. The explosive discharge ricocheted around the valley. Bullet after bullet thunked perfectly into the white silk, the bark splitting and chips flying, the riflemen's accuracy impressive, just as it should be. He would gladly go into battle knowing those men were behind him, firing their rifles at the enemy. Several other heavily armed men wielded their sabres in a fierce training session, the loud clang of their blades echoing all around. Jamie leaned his forearms across the top beam as he whistled to another horse. Julia's favourite, if Harry wasn't mistaken. She always rode Star Blazer, the mare easy to spot with a white star emblazoned on her forehead. Jamie fed the mare some of his apple too. "I can ask the stable lad to ready Star Blazer for you instead." Harry pushed off the post and set one booted foot on the rail next to Jamie's booted feet. Forearms across the top beam, he leaned in. "I don't want to cause more work for the lads." Jamie petted between Star Blazer's silky ears. "It won't take more than a few minutes to make the change." He raised a hand to the stable lad and called out, "Ready this horse for Jamie instead of the palfrey I requested." "Yes, Major." The boy scooped a saddle from inside the stables, his voice muffled as he spoke to the other lad inside the cool recesses. Then he brought the saddle out to the corral, unclipped the gate, and readied Star Blazer. Jamie snuck into the enclosure and checked the cinch before leading the horse out and slotting one foot into the stirrup. The boy heaved into the saddle. "Your horse is saddled, sir." The other stable hand passed him his reins. "Thank you." He mounted up, checked the saddlebags held a flask of water and rations, and once assured all was well, he cast a look at Jamie. We're headed directly to the coastline. Righto. Keep up if you can. A teasing grin as Jamie thrust his knees into his mare's flanks and galloped away. Oh, he'd keep up. He'd been riding since before he could walk. He urged his destrier into a gallop and rode hard until he came in side by side with the boy. They weaved up the hilly trail, the wild breeze sweeping the grass in rippling waves all about. Jamie beamed at him, his head tucked close to Starblazer's neck. Even in the midst of a war, one can find beauty and peace. This land is stunning, don't you think, Major? Stunning, yes. He settled more comfortably into the saddle, and gripping his reins with a firmer hold, he urged his mount on, and they raced over the rise before tackling the next hill. An hour later the coastline shimmered into view, the blue waters of the Atlantic Ocean rippling for as far as the eye could see. Race you to the beach! Jamie was off, flying like the wind. He raced in hard pursuit, and whipped past the boy by a horse's head. Along the stretch of white sand, he slowed his mount, then with a toss of one leg over his destrier's rump, he thumped onto the soft grains. After securing his horse to a beached log, he kicked off his boots, unbelted his sword, and shucked his tan tunic and blue breeches. "What are you doing?" Jamie squeaked, still atop his horse. "Going for a swim. Come on, race you into the water." "What? No!" "Yes. Even soldiers are allowed a moment to relax and enjoy themselves." Naked as the day he'd been born, he ran full force into the waves and dove, leaving the stunned boy in his wake. Chapter 6. Julia fanned her hand over her heated cheeks as Harry disappeared under the waves. She hadn't expected him to strip down to nothing. Nothing. But oh my, when he'd raced away after issuing his challenge, she'd caught a mouth-watering glimpse of his heavily muscled body as he'd bounded into the waves. Of course, she'd seen her fair share of bare limbs from men being treated in the infirmary, but this was quite different. No fully virile man had ever disrobed in front of her like he just had. If only she could likewise disrobe and join him for a swim, but not a possibility, not if she wished to keep her disguise of Jamie intact. Unfortunately, she also couldn't swim. It was her one great fear, the water. Knowing she could have so easily drowned as a baby had always caused issues to arise whenever she attempted to push through the waves. Never had she managed to go beyond her waist in the water, whether it be in a river, lake, or the sea. If she did, her heart would race abnormally, shivers would arise and overtake her body, and her mind would cloud over with darkness. She could safely stand at the edge of the shoreline where the waves rolled in and tickled her toes, but having an escape path was essential. She needed to be within a few steps of standing once more on solid ground. Anteros had tried to calm her fears over the years. Her childhood friend had taught her how to wade within the shallows, but even he hadn't been able to break the icy cold dread which soon had black spots dancing before her eyes should she go too far from the shoreline into the water. Which meant she'd had to accept her restrictions. She could enjoy walking along the beach where the surf rolled in, the sand wet and cool under her toes, the salty scent of the sea breeze washing over her, but no more. Sliding from her saddle, she dismounted and secured Starblazer to the same beached log Harry had secured his horse. She'd enjoy a walk along the beach for today. On the springy grass, she sat and unlaced her boots before rolling her breeches to mid-calf. Taking care with her step, she tiptoed across the sand and dipped her toes into the bubbly surf. Out beyond the breakers, Harry swam with sure strokes. Merciful heavens! He cut a fine figure as he glided gracefully through the water in a parallel line to the beach. A seagull suddenly screeched overhead, and she lifted her gaze. The bird circled the airwaves, its wingtips wide as it searched for a fish close to the surface. It spotted its prey and dived, wings tucked in as it plunged below the surface, then it heaved back up with a fish between its beaks. Another seagull dived a little farther out and emerged with its catch, and she darted along the beach and bounded onto a rock protruding from the edge of this beautiful bay. Waves splashed the boulder, and she giggled as a spray of water dampened her tunic. She could enjoy this shallower water with no issue. Her fear of the water wasn't completely irrational, though. She had no problem boarding a ship or sailing across the sea, which she was most grateful for. With her hand to her brow, she searched for Harry again, and gasped as a familiar three-mast vessel rounded the bay. The Cobra. Anteros stood at the helm captaining his ship, and she waved. She didn't doubt he'd spied her through his telescope. The man had the eyes of a hawk. They'd both been so young when they'd first met, her 7 and Anteros 3 years older at 10. His grandfather had commissioned her father for a project. Father had been asked to design and engineer a pulley system on an island just off the coastline of Sicily. Father's mission had been to successfully hoist ancient artefacts from deep within the ruins of an archaeological site up to the surface, where Anteros' grandfather could then ensure the artefacts were preserved for future generations of his family. She and Father had lived on the island for a year as Father had worked on the project. During that time, she and Anteros had gotten into a great deal of mischief. It had all begun when Anteros had convinced her that they should explore the tunnels below the ruins. He'd loaned her a pair of his old breeches and a tunic. She'd stuck her long hair underneath the cap and been excited as she'd moved about freely as a lad. That's when she'd first taken the facade of Jamie, the first time of many times. The two of them had been inseparable, and she'd even joined Anteros after his lessons, both of them conversing in the languages taught to him by his tutors. Over the years that had followed, she and Father had returned to the island for further projects. Father had been thrilled to design and build other engineering systems for Anteros' grandfather, and she'd been as equally thrilled to spend more time with her friend. During those years, she'd confided in Anteros about her adoption, and he'd confided in her about his true heritage, and thus had been born the most splendid of friendships. A rogue wave suddenly washed in and pounded over her boulder. She darted back and jumped onto the beach as white surf streamed around her feet. Squelching back through the wet sand, grains oozing between her toes, she searched the breakers once more for Harry, while out in the bay, Anteros lowered a skiff over the side of his ship and sank his oars into the waves. Keeping her cap in place, she yelled Harry's name. Then he suddenly emerged from the waves directly in front of her, not more than 20 feet away. Water sluiced down his chest as he pushed through the surf toward shore. Rippled abs and... "Jamie!" Anteros bellowed at her, his lips slashing down in a scowl as he rode the breakers. Drat. Anteros could be rather overprotective of her, and she really needed to stop staring at Harry. She heaved her chin up and groaned when all she could see were white clouds bobbing across the blue expanse of the sky. "The water is glorious." Harry swept past her, then a rustle of clothing as he dressed. "You should have joined me." "The boy can't," Anteros barked as he beached his skiff, hauled it onto the sand, and marched toward her in a white tunic open at the neck, and knee-high boots encasing his feet. Curved swords were belted at both of Anteros' hips, while his pistol had been jammed down the front of his tight-fitting sapphire breeches. Anteros could be quite a formidable force at times, a man who suited his moniker, the Cobra. He could be both as protective and as fearsome as the snake. No one was permitted to get between him and those he held dear to his heart. He would snap and bite if they did. At his neck, the emblem of a cobra was engraved into the heavy piece of gold coinage which they'd both discovered together, deep underground within the tunnels of the archaeological site. When he stepped up to her and affectionately tapped her chin, she tapped his emblem in return and grinned back at him. "Grrr," he muttered under his breath. "Your father would tan your hide if he saw you right now." "Then it's just as well he can't see me." A wink. "Upon my soul, you have always been such a mischievous imp." "Says the man who taught me how to be mischievous." "You make it impossible to argue back." Anteros swung around in front of her, effectively blocking her view of Harry, who'd already pulled on his dark blue breeches. She sighed when Anteros muttered some more. "What do you mean by the boy can't?" Harry asked Anteros. "What the lad has grievously forgotten to inform you about is that he has an unusual fear of water." Anteros planted his hands on his hips. "He can sail upon it, walk in the shallows, but don't ask him to go in over his head or he'll faint. Fainting means death by drowning." "Is that right?" Harry asked her as he peeked around Anteros before flapping his tan tunic over his wet head. "Yes, Anteros is right." She shuffled her feet. "My sister has the same fear as well. Neither of us can swim, and we're rather annoyed that we can't. We both detest it and the weakness it gives us." "The only way to overcome such a deep-seated fear is to meet it head-on." Harry's footsteps crunched the leaves scattered across the grassy verge as he collected their horses' reins. "I can teach both you and your sister how to swim if you'd like." "Anteros and my father have tried and failed." She unrolled the hem of her breeches and hopped about as she pulled on her boots. Harry handed her Starblazer's reins, then mounted up, the leather of his saddle creaking as he glanced at Anteros. "Jamie and I are inspecting the forts along this western coastline. If you'd like to join us, please do." "Thank you for the invitation, but my crew are awaiting my return. I shouldn't have left my ship as it is. Only a possible crisis threatened my sanity." Anteros stalked to his skiff with a warning glance at her. "I shall leave you both to continue on. Take all care, Jamie." "I shall, and you too, Anteros." With her reins in hand, she slid one booted foot into Starblazer's stirrup and hoisted herself into her saddle. With a slap of her horse's rump, she jerked forward just as Harry kneed his destrier. The two of them galloped away from the beach, and she rode across the stony hills, the grass dry and brittle in places from the strong ocean winds. "I'd still like for you to give me the chance to teach you and your sister how to swim," Harry yelled across the wind battering into them. "Try with my sister first, and if you succeed, then you may teach me." She could concede that much. "Good. I'm glad you're open to the possibility of learning." He nodded his approval, went to speak again, only the boom of gunfire swept across the jagged sea cliffs toward them. Up ahead, gun emplacements were mounted in staggered intervals across the hilly rises, to ensure each fort's firing range was covered in the case of an attack. As a guardsman noted their arrival, he blew a horn, and the gunfire halted. "Follow me, and keep your gaze alert," Harry ordered as he galloped in front and took the lead. "Yes, Major." Following behind him as instructed, she rode, and when they drew up to the first fort, she came in alongside Harry. He tossed one leg over his horse's rump, thumped to the ground, and secured his snorting animal to a hitching post. She dismounted too, looped her reins to the same post, and followed Harry up the incline. At the top of the rise, Portuguese labourers worked alongside their own Englishmen, a united team as they moved earth and finished building the retaining walls of stone, which would aid them in strengthening this seaward position. Wellington's chief engineers, Fletcher and Jones, as well as father, had been the three men to design these trenches, which allowed 200 men to safely remain inside them. The forts themselves holding 3 cannons each, which gave the soldiers firing the guns a bird's-eye view across the cliffs and out to sea. The French would never be able to slip through here should they attempt to take this land by way of the nearest cove. At the top of the rise, she ducked into the cool recesses of the fort built partially into the ground. The captain welcomed Harry, the 2 men shaking hands, while she wandered toward the 3 soldiers standing at each of the 3 lookout points behind the guns. This defensive outpost was crucial, and should these soldiers spy their enemy advancing by ship, they could send word directly via the signal stations to St. Vincent's, where they could dispatch thousands of soldiers to come to their aid. Their navy could also join in the battle, Anteros too, since he patrolled these waters. None of them would ever allow the Portuguese people to lose their freedom or this great land. As she stepped up to one of the cannon slots under the fortified flat line of the stone roof, she smiled at the sight of Anteros's warship cutting through the waves. Harry touched her arm, the captain directly at his side. "It's time for a full inspection of the trenches. Are you ready to aid me? I'll need you to keep an eye out for anything you see which mightn't look right." "I'm ready." She followed Harry and the captain outside, ducking her head under the low entrance door. They weaved through the deep-dug trenches, and when she passed one section of the ditch running alongside the cliff face, the wind blew and dust flew. Stones skittered down the reinforced side and bounced off her boots. She crunched on a few loose stones scattered across the stony base, none of them embedded deep into the dirt. Recently fallen stones, a telling sign that this section of the wall mightn't be as strong as it should. Father would never permit a weakened wall like this to remain, not when it could mean the death of their soldiers should it collapse during a battle. She called out to Harry, who had continued on with the captain. "Major Trentbury, take a look at this, if you will." He halted and wandered back to her. "What have you found?" He never questioned Jamie's expertise, no matter the young age she maintained as the boy. She certainly couldn't pass for a fully grown man, not when she couldn't even grow a single whisker. Nor could she amass any solid muscle tone, so 16 she would remain, for as long as she could possibly pull it off. "Take a look at this." She gripped the stony lip, and more stones skittered down. "This section needs strengthening." "It looks like it to me, too." He grasped her shoulders, moved her out of the way, then bounded up onto the ledge. He jumped up and down, again and again as he tested its strength. Then, crash! Stones and rocks tumbled everywhere, and Harry disappeared over the ridge with a bellow. "Major!" A rock hit her shin, but she scrambled up the fallen mound, and once on top of the rubble, dropped to her knees and searched for Harry down the sheer side of the craggy cliffside. Waves crashed into the rocky wall far below and sprayed high. "Major!" "Here. I'm here." He clung to bushes protruding from a crack in the rocks about halfway down, his sleeve ripped and blood streaming from a nasty gash, his face covered in dust and grime. "Don't move!" Labourers had already amassed behind her, and she yelled to them, "Someone fetch me a rope, now!" "I've got one." The captain snapped a rope looped over the top of a support pillar farther along the trench, then bounded up beside her. He wrapped one coiled end around his waist, knotted it in place while 2 workmen behind him kept a grip on his legs. Once secured, he tossed the remaining rope down the slope. "Grab a hold, Major." Harry nabbed the snaking end as it whistled past, then released the bush and, hand over hand, hauled himself back up the cliff. When he reached her at the lip, he swept her with him and jumped back into the trench, the captain bounding down after them. "You shouldn't have been so careless," she scolded him as she plucked twigs and bits of leaves from his hair, before gripping his arm and inspecting the wound he'd taken. The cut was deep and would need stitches, which she couldn't administer here in this trench. Instead, she ripped a strip of linen from the hem of her yellowed tunic and wrapped it around his bicep. "That'll have to hold until we can get you to the infirmary at St. Vincent's." "Don't fuss, Jamie." He tweaked her nose like she was a kid. "Don't fuss!" she screeched. "Don't tell me not to fuss!" She was about to scold him again when he gave her his back. "Ignore the lad," he told the captain as he faced the man. "I'd say that section certainly needs strengthening. Ensure your workmen make certain it can hold, then show me the remainder of these trenches." "Will do." The captain coiled his rope and bellowed instructions to the labourers to get the job done. Then the captain continued along with Harry. Huffing, she followed them, her fingers itching to wring Harry's neck. 3 hours later, they'd finally completed a full check of each of the 3 forts, and all of the interconnecting trenches, and only once assured everything was in order, did she and Harry return to their horses. Harry flinched as he collected his reins and mounted up, while she fought the most desperate urge to demand he allow her to take another look at his wound. He seemed to sense her worry, since he frowned at her and muttered, "Honestly, I've been injured worse than this. Let's ride home." "When you disappeared over the ledge—" Her voice broke on the last word as she stuck one foot in her stirrup and swung a leg over. "I mean, you could have died. There are rocks at the base of those cliffs, surging waves and—" "At least we know our enemy can't climb that cliff, not without a rope secured to the top." He thrust his knees into his destria's flanks and galloped away. With another huff and several curses under her breath, she nudged her horse and followed him in hard pursuit. He'd frightened her with his fall. Frightened her terribly. His life could have been snuffed out then and there, gone in the blink of an eye, and he'd just brushed her concern aside as if his life didn't matter. Well, his life mattered to her. With the war raging, he could perish at any time, and she'd never see him again. Her heart ached, all heavy and hard in her chest. Not good. Not good at all. The ride home was made in complete silence, as if a standoff had arisen between them, and when they finally galloped into camp, the sun had begun its descent, slowly sinking behind the hills. Darkness reigned, all but the campfires around the encampment glowing and guiding their way. Next to the stables she slowed and bounded from her saddle. She handed the reins to the stable lad who hurried forward. She thanked him. Harry thumped to the ground, gripped her shoulder, and grumbled, "Inside. Now. It's getting late." "The darkness can't hurt me, whereas falling down a cliff face can." A fling of her arms before she stormed along the gravelly pathway, past dozens of soldiers who'd pulled up logs to the crackling warmth of the fire. On the top of the hill, The thick stone walls of St. Vincent's rose like an impenetrable fortress in the dark, light glowing from torches either side of the gatehouse, and at each corner of the crenellated curtain walls. Captain Poole stood next to the inner courtyard stables with the reins of 2 saddled horses in hand. He motioned for Harry to join him, and she wasn't sure what to do. Go with Harry? Stay here and wait for him to return to her? She needed to ensure Harry visited the infirmary, that his wound was tended to. She opted to wait, since Poole clearly wished for a private word with Harry, and hopefully their conversation wouldn't take too long. The 2 men spoke in hushed tones, Harry glancing at her once, twice, then he nodded at Poole and loped back to her. Gripping her shoulders, he kept his stern expression in place. "Jamie, I need to ride out immediately with Poole, and might be gone for 2 or 3 days. Something urgent has arisen." "Riding to where?" "I can't disclose that information." "Which means you're riding to the front line?" He neither confirmed nor denied her words, but instead said, "I need you to speak to Julia for me. Tell her I'll be away, an unexpected trip. Tell her—" He eyed his feet, frowned, and shook his head as if he wasn't quite sure what he wished to say. "Tell her what?" she prompted when he remained quiet. "That I'm sorry. That's all. Tell her I'm sorry." He bounded back to Poole, accepted the reins of one of the horses, and heaved into the saddle. The 2 men nudged their horses and rode out, dust billowing as they bolted into the dark. The guardsman called for the portcullis to be lowered for the night, and the clunky sound of chains echoed within the stone-arched entrance gate and reverberated across the inner courtyard. Her heart clanged with the same clunky echo. Chapter 7. Harry rode hard through the night. Every moment counted for him and Poole. There could be no delay in reaching the pass where a scout had thought he'd seen additional French troops marching toward it from farther along the hills. If the scout was right, then the troops were headed directly toward Massena's encampment. They needed to verify the possible sighting. Poole pounded along beside him, his gaze fierce as they raced across the rough terrain, in and around ravines and up steep and craggy hills. Massena clearly isn't willing to give up his hold on what land he's already taken for Napoleon. Napoleon wants all of Portugal, not that we'll let that idiotic Corsican take it. He feared what he and Poole would find at the pass. Their fighting numbers were even at present, sitting at 14,000 each side, but if more soldiers had been sent by Napoleon to join Massena's contingent, then they'd be outnumbered. Being outnumbered would make their oncoming battle with the enemy more difficult to fight, although that wouldn't stop Wellington from issuing the order for them to go into battle. They'd won wars with less men than their enemy before. They'd simply have to do so again. Unfortunately, it was also a battle that would take him far away from Julia. More thoughts of her swarmed through his mind, as they always did when he was separated from her. He feared what she'd think since he'd left without even speaking to her, but there simply hadn't been any time. As daylight finally broke on the far horizon, he shook his head. Grey clouds smothered the sky as a storm brewed. By midday, that grey cloud had darkened to an ominous black. They rode on, though, even as thunder rumbled with forked lightning flashing here and there. The wind howled as it rose, and the heavens appeared ready to open. By mid-afternoon, he and Poole pulled their mounts to a halt underneath a tree, and he waited as his friend foraged in his saddlebags. Poole pulled out 2 thick woolen coats and tossed him one, since he'd packed enough provisions for both of them. After thanking Poole, he shrugged into the coat, his wounded arm throbbing at the move. Not much he could do about that, not until he had more time on his hands to tend to the injury. He buttoned the front of his coat and flicked the collar up. With no time to rest, he nudged his horse out from under the tree and tucked his head close to his mount's neck. The rain hit, sleeting into him and Poole. They galloped across the rough terrain. Water streamed down the hills, sending loose dirt into a muddy river underfoot that slowed their pace. As they reached the gorge before the pass, he heaved his horse up next to a stream swollen into a raging river, the current twisting and turning dangerously. That stream was the one they needed to cross, the only way to reach their destination. Over the whistling wind he yelled, "We can't turn back now. I'll go first." "I'll be right behind you." Harry urged his horse down the bank and ploughed through. Waves surged around his destrier's flanks, and he encouraged his horse to continue, patting its neck until he reached the other side. He nudged his mount up the bank and waved to Poole. "Make it quick!" "Coming!" Poole splashed through after him, the water rushing past, all manner of bracken dumping up and down in the waves. His friend steered his horse to one side, going deeper, but thankfully missing the jagged end of a log that would have thrown him from his saddle if it had hit him. His mount found his hooved feet again and heaved up the embankment, his horse's tail swishing and flicking a spray of water as Poole came in beside him. "That was too close for comfort," Poole uttered. "Mine as well. Let's continue on." Soaked through, yet determined to see his duty done, he spurred his horse on, Poole riding hard on his heels. They galloped up the craggy hill to the cliff face overlooking the pass. It was hard going to get to the top of the rise, but they made it. Under a lone pine tree he dismounted, his boots sinking into thick mud. A heavy mist swirled as he secured his horse to a low branch, Poole doing the same. Then the two of them crept to the very peak, got down onto their bellies, and scrambled through bushes to the rocky edge. More thundering rain. It pummeled into them, the bushes only offering a touch of buffering against the devil of the storm. In the pass far below, the rain swept the misty fog away, and there, directly underneath the overhang of the cliffs, stood thousands of soldiers from the French Empire taking shelter. A gust blew through, the line of men stretching all the way to the bend 600 feet distant. So many soldiers! 3,000 at least, and when added to the 14,000 at Massena's camp, their enemy would sit at 17,000 strong. Poole held a telescope to his eye as he searched ahead at the beginning of the line. "Drat it all," he breathed. "Junot leads this additional regiment of soldiers, and I can see Massena. He's riding in, a dozen men at his side." "Let me see." He accepted the telescope from Poole and lifted the scope to his eye. One low growl escaped him as he too spied Napoleon's two leading commanders greeting each other. "Confound it! Wellington will be furious." Their commander would be more than furious, particularly when two French commanders meant a dual attack would be forthcoming. But at least forewarned was forearmed. Heaving a foggy breath, he tried to keep his elbows steady underneath him, his scope still trained on the French, but his arm wound throbbed, and he shook from head to foot in the icy cold. "We need to inform Wellington immediately." "Agreed. We need to report our findings directly to him at Perro Negro." Poole held out his hand for the telescope, and he passed it across. "We'll ride there first, before we return to St. Vincent's." They both shuffled back out of the bushes and heaved to their feet. In the gorge, the river he and Poole had just crossed had broken its banks, the water tearing earth away as it gushed downstream. The French stood behind them, and an impassable river in front. Of all the blasted bad luck! Fisting his hands, Harry gritted his teeth as rain snaked down his back underneath his drenched coat. "Curse it all! We might have a little trouble getting off this blasted cliff, my friend." Chapter 8. Gritty-eyed, Julia stretched and pushed her hands out from underneath the warmth of her bed-covers. Yet another day had dawned after another restless night spent waiting for Harry to return from his mission. 5 endlessly long days had now passed. What kind of mission took this amount of time? Or had something happened to him? It had rained solidly for the first 3 days after he'd left. Then they'd had grey skies with drizzle the past 2. Maybe the weather was delaying his return? Oh my, she couldn't halt her worry, or that he was infiltrating her dreams each and every night. The door creaked open, and Una peered in. "Good, you're awake." "Come in." She tossed the covers aside and scooted out. "I bring good news." Una smiled, her eyes lighting up. Her heart did a flip-flop before it leaped. "Tell me Major Trentbury is back." Major Trentbury is back, along with Captain Poole. They got stuck near the front line for longer than they'd hoped. Bad weather kept them hemmed in, but once the rain eased and the river became passable, they rode to Perro Negro to meet with Wellington. They're here right now in the war room with the other officers. "I need to see him." She needed to calm her fears and see for herself that he was all right. She collected a pair of woolen stockings from her wardrobe. It had been chilly outside after all the bad weather they'd had, and she would need the added warmth. "I feared he would never return." "No much longer now, my dear." Una squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. Bouncing onto one foot, she scrunched up the hosiery leg and shoved her toes in. A switch to her other foot, and she jiggled the stockings up. "I believe a pretty gown is in order." Una rummaged about in her wardrobe and selected a blue-green day gown with a high waist. The heeler smoothed the fabric and held it out. "This colour always looks wonderful on you." "It's one of my favourites too. Thank you." She lifted her ivory cotton nightgown over her head, tossed it aside, and slid her arms into the gown's long sleeves, and got smothered in the soft fabric as she eased the gown over her head. The layers of blue-green slithered down her body and brushed the polished floorboards. With shaky fingers, she tied the ribbon high on her waist and lifted a brow at Una. "How did he look? Be honest." "He came through the front door looking rather weary." "If he rode to Perro Negro to speak to Wellington, then he could have sent word along the signal stations to me that he was all right." She brushed her hair. "I wonder why he didn't." "Never mind why, my dear. Only be happy that he has returned." Una pinched her cheeks. "There, that's better. You needed some more colour." "I wonder how much longer Father will be gone." At least her father had sent word to her and Una about his delay, that he needed to remain at Sobral to attend to a few other jobs. "One of the guardsmen brought me an updated message from your father this morning. He'll be back by the end of the week. Come, let's not tarry any longer." Una clasped her hand and tugged her from her room. She hurried along the passageway with Una, and they climbed the stairs leading to the war room. Outside the war room door stood a guard on duty. She crossed to him. "Please, I need to speak to Major Trentbury. Only for a minute. Could you fetch him for me?" "Of course, Miss Chalmers." The guard stepped inside the room and closed the door. She waited, shuffling her slippered feet, her fingers twisted in her skirts, Una standing beside her and offering her an abundance of support. The guard finally reappeared, but not with Harry. "Is he coming?" she asked. "No, miss." The guard clasped his hands behind his back, resuming his position. "The Major said to inform you that he is busy." "Busy?" Shocked, her mouth flapped open. "Did you tell him it was me who asked to see him?" "I did, Miss Chalmers." Disbelief rolled through her. Harry had left abruptly. He hadn't sent her a message through the signal stations when he'd reached Perro Negro. He had declined the chance to speak to her just now. What did it all mean? Other than that he was sending her a message, a very strong one, that she wasn't worth one blasted minute of his time. Anger sizzled in her blood, and she curled her hands into fists. How dare he ignore her and treat her so badly? All she'd wanted to do was make certain he was all right. Pain pummeled through her. Chapter 9. That night, Harry tossed back a third glass of brandy following his meeting with the officers in the war room, a meeting which had lasted all day as plans had been devised. He clinked the empty goblet on his oak mantelpiece in his chamber, his fire glowing and casting flickering light into the shadowed corners. For the dozenth time, he again thumped on his connecting door with Julia. Not being able to speak to her on his return had unsettled him, particularly when he'd had to turn her away from outside the war room. "Julia, I understand you're angry that I left on my mission so abruptly." No answer. "Julia!" He rapped harder, since he hadn't uncovered an opening for the connecting door on his side as yet. The blasted latch remained concealed and unidentifiable, although he'd caught rustlings as she'd move about, and knew she was there and that she'd heard him. "Answer me." "I'm not talking to you." A snappy answer, her voice close, directly on the other side of the wooden panels. "I need to see you." "Only on your time and when it suits you, apparently." A huff. "Surely, sir, you could have sent me a message through the signal stations when you reached Perro Negro." "What I needed to say to you was private and personal, not for all of the guardsmen between here and Perro Negro to hear." "You could have sent a message which I could have deciphered. You needn't have given away anything that you didn't wish to. For all I knew, you might never have returned from your secret mission. You could have been caught by our enemy, then been slaughtered. And drat you, I hate that I couldn't sleep more than an hour or two each night while you were away. I detest you, despise you, and if I never see your handsome face again, I'll be extremely happy." His heart lurched at her words, fierce and impassioned words. He stroked the panels, wishing he was stroking her instead. "I beg your forgiveness, Julia. He had no excuse for his abominable behaviour. If their positions had been reversed, and it had been her that had been called away on such a dangerous mission, then he would have moved heaven and earth to find her. 5 days, Harry! She thumped the wall just as he had. I hate how tangled my emotions have now become regarding you. Again, all I can do is apologise. Leaning his forehead on the wooden panels, he growled under his breath. Then he lifted his head and everything swayed, his next word slightly slurred from his heavy consumption of alcohol. I need more brandy. Why, I never... A gasp. Are you drunk? Yes. He couldn't lie to her. He shoved his fingers through his damp hair, his skin hot and moist with sweat. I don't feel well. Your words are becoming more slurred with every sentence you speak. I'm not sure what's wrong with me. While he and Poole had been stuck on the craggy hill after crossing the river, which had become completely impassable for almost 3 days, he'd unstrapped the binding Jamie had knotted over his wound and allowed Poole to take a look at it. In the drenching rain, the captain had done his best with a needle and thread. Poole had even given him some laudanum from his supplies for the throbbing pain, although the opiate was brutal stuff and always clouded his senses. Allowing any form of incapacity while their enemy was so close wasn't acceptable. He'd pocketed the vial, but hadn't partaken of it as yet. Temptation, though, warred within him now. Should he swig the dratted medication which always made his head spin and caused disturbing dreams to plague him when under the influence of it? Or should he leave it and suffer the pain which was duly his to suffer anyway? His chamber door creaked open, and Jamie, not Julia, unfortunately, peeked around the corner, the lad's cap stuffed on his head, and his suspenders hanging loose over a white tunic and brown breeches. "What do you want?" he muttered to the boy. "I was passing by and caught your argument with my sister. Your voices were a tad too loud. Are you all right, Major?" He plucked the vial of laudanum from his pocket and dropped it onto his bedside table. Then he sank down on his blue bedcovers, rested his head on his pillow, and kicked off his boots. "Please, if you have any sway with your sister, I beg of you to fetch her for me." "Is that laudanum?" The lad snuck across and picked up the vial of reddish-brown liquid, pulled the cork, and sniffed the medication. Frowning, Jamie corked the vial again and growled under his breath. "How did you come by this?" "Poole. I've had pain in my arm. He stitched the wound I got from my fall down the cliff." "That was 5 days ago. You should be well onto the road of recovery by now." "Well, I'm not." He pointed a wobbly finger at the door. "Jamie, if you won't fetch your sister for me, then please fetch me another dratted bottle of brandy from the officer's supply cupboard so I can drink this pain away. If anyone asks, tell them I gave you permission to bring it to me." He glared at the gold and blue striped canopy overhead, which swayed even though no air circulated in his room. No, it wasn't just the canopy swaying. Everything was, his head included. "It's not liquor you need, but to have your wound tended to properly." Jamie dropped down onto the bed beside him with a bounce, which made his head spin even more. "Sit still." He thumped the lad's arm. "Ouch!" The lad thumped him back. "Sir, take the laudanum, and then I'll fetch my sister." "Laudanum is a bitter and repulsive brew. Have you ever taken it yourself?" "Yes, and if you pinch your nose when you swallow, it'll go down far easier." "I'm not taking it." "You are a terrible patient. Let me see the stitches Poole made." The boy set the vial back on his table, then pressed a hand to his forehead. A gasp and a growl. "Major, you have a raging fever. Wait right here. Cooling you down is imperative. I'll open the window." The boy swept the wooden shutters aside and pushed his window open. The full moon shone high within the midnight blue depths of the night sky, the stars all ablaze and twinkling bright. A light breeze swirled in and swept over his heated skin. Jamie dashed out the door, and it clunked shut behind him. More heat washed through him. He heaved his regimental shirt over his head, and sharp pain tore through his arm. Slowly, He unravelled the bandage covering the stitches Poole had sewed, and, well, no wonder he was still having such trouble. The wound had reopened and now oozed pus and blood. He'd need to have it cleaned and restitched, otherwise he'd be out of commission for days, which was completely unacceptable. He was a hussar. Hussars had duties to attend to. The secret connecting door swung open. Julia stood there in the doorway, her pale golden locks all tousled and brown eyes blazing, her bare toes poking out from under the hem of her ivory nightgown. She marched inside, her arms laden with cloths and medical provisions. "Jamie," she muttered, "said you had a fever and wouldn't take your medication." "I've missed you." He wanted to drink in the sight of her, only she set her armload down beside his bed and disappeared back into her chamber. Thankfully, she returned a few seconds later with a basin of water in hand. She dunked a cloth into the water and, seated beside him, gently wiped his wound clean. He caught one errant lock of her hair and twirled it around his finger. "You're so beautiful." "You're annoying." With her lips pinched in a tight line, she picked up the needle and thread she'd brought and stabbed the needle into his flesh. He barely held back his moan. Understood." "Good." She drew the needle through with efficient ease, and he gritted his teeth against the pain. "I'm extremely mad at you, Harry." "I know the feeling. I'm mad for you, too." "Not mad for you, I'm mad at you. There is a distinct difference between the two emotions." With her face so close to his and the top laces of her nightgown loose, his fingers itched to loosen those laces further, so he could nibble on the creamy skin of her neck. "Can you turn your arm more to the side?" She shuffled around to get a better angle, her neckline suddenly gaping wider, and he frowned. Her breasts had been bound. He could see the wrappings, and they were pinning her mounds flat to her chest. "Your breasts have been bound? Why?" "Yes, they have." She tied a knot and sliced the end of the thread with a small blade she'd brought with her. "Do you care to explain?" "No." Sucking her bottom lip into her mouth, she pressed a finger to his lips. "Wait right here. I'll be back in a moment." "Where are you going?" Now that he had her close, he didn't wish to have her leave, not even for a single moment. "I need you. Please stay." "Well, I need to apply a healing paste to your wound. Then I intend on bandaging it." She swept back through the panelled door. "Does it hurt?" he called out, pushing up onto the elbow of his good arm. "The bindings?" "No, and you're in luck. I collected some fresh plantain herb this afternoon with Una, and when the herb is fresh, it has the most wonderful healing properties." She returned and sat beside him. "Please, remove those bindings from around your breasts." "When I'm ready I shall remove the bindings, and not a moment before." She plucked the leaves from a stem of plantain and stuck it into a stone mortar. With the pestle in hand, she ground the herb until it turned into a rich green paste. Then she dabbed a cloth into the paste and carefully smeared it along his stitched arm. She flapped out a strip of clean cloth from the supplies she'd brought, wrapped it firmly around his bicep, and knotted it in place. With her belongings bundled up, she disappeared back into her room, then returned with a small flask. She tipped the vial of laudanum into it, and seated beside him once more, held the flask to his lips. "Laudanum slips down the throat far easier with a dash of whiskey. If you drink this for me, I'll unbind my breasts." "That is a compromise I can accept." He opened his mouth and gulped the whiskey. Once he'd downed the lot, he swiped his mouth with the back of his hand and motioned to her chest. "Your turn." She stoppered the flask, set it aside, and standing before him, twirled one finger in a circle. "Turn over. I need privacy." He gave her that privacy, shuffling over on the bed and giving her his back. He waited and waited and waited. "You may turn around again." A swing of his legs, and he rested his feet on the floor, and smiled as she waved the wrappings in front of him. Unable to help himself, he nabbed her around the waist and toppled her back onto the bed beside him. She squealed, then giggled. "Harry, what are you doing?" "Shh, not so loud," he whispered. "Jamie already heard us from the passageway." With his gaze on hers, he murmured, "I want to kiss you all night. Does that shock you?" "Yes." She searched his gaze. And I'm still mad at you?
Please forgive me for all that I've done wrong. I give you my word I'll never make any of those mistakes again.
He kissed the tip of her nose, both her cheeks, then her chin.
I should never have left you without saying goodbye, and I regret doing so.
What about sending me a message from Perro Negro?
I was trying to protect your reputation. Receiving a personal message from me might have caused gossip to begin flying, particularly when all I wanted to say was that I couldn't wait to hold you in my arms again.
Tears pooled in her eyes at his words, the sight tearing at his heart.
It has been an endless 5 days for me, Julia.
You abandoned me, she sniffed. My parents did the same.
Pardon?
That made no sense. The professor was her father, and he certainly hadn't abandoned her. Of course, the professor was still at Sobral, which he'd learnt on his return when the professor hadn't attended their officers' meeting. I mean my true parents.
The professor isn't your true parent.
He was struggling to follow her. He's the only father I've ever known, but he isn't my actual father. 27 years ago, he found me inside a padded basket snagged on some reeds along a river near Una's cottage. My father asked far and wide if anyone knew of a newborn baby being cast aside, but when no one came forth, he made the decision to raise me as his daughter. He adopted me and gave me his love, an abandoned child not even loved by her own parents. I owe him my life and all that I am.
I already hold your father in great esteem, and now even more so.
Why hadn't she told him about her adoption before now? He would have understood.
Do you have any other secrets you wish to share?
Yes. With a long sigh, she curled her arms around his neck. It's because of my adoption that no gentleman wants me. For those men who showed an interest in me over the years, when I declared the truth about my birth, they declared that my parentage was soiled and they promptly left.
Then they were all idiots.
She smiled at his frank remark. Say that again.
They were gits of the greatest sort.
I do believe you mean that, Major Trentbury.
I mean everything I say.
He dipped his head and captured her mouth. Then he sucked on her lower lip madly before letting it go with a soft pop. He growled low in his throat, wanting more.
Do you still wish to lie with me each night?
I fear that I'm giving in to you far too quickly.
The French are gathering their force, and I fear we won't have more than a few days together. I need to hold you, to kiss you.
Well, when you say it that way, I could be coerced. She touched her plump lower lip, her gaze on his. I do want more of your kisses. I can't deny the need I have to deepen our friendship. It pulses strongly within me.
Then give in to that need.
He pressed a kiss to the side of her neck, his own need for her an unstoppable beat in his blood.
I promise to never leave the fort again without informing you personally of where I'm going, no matter where I might be travelling to.
Truly?
Yes, and I give you my word that I'll bombard you with messages along the signal stations should you desire it, for however long we have together. We'll sort out a code we can both decipher.
He nuzzled deeper, then nipped her ear. She pressed a finger to his lips. He caught her hand and twined their fingers together.
Say yes, that you'll stay.
Yes. With slightly jittery fingers, she turned his hand and pressed his palm against her lips, her kiss so sweetly tender. Harry, don't make me regret staying with you tonight.
I'll make certain you never regret a single moment that we spend together.
He covered her mouth with his and kissed her deeply, the sweet taste of her swarming his senses. Your kisses are heavenly. Voice hitching, she gripped his shoulders. Oh, but you've taken the vial of laudanum and most certainly have a fever. You should lie down and rest.
The laudanum isn't affecting me, and I won't be able to lie down until I've kissed you senseless.
Heat surged through him, and he deepened their kiss, plunging his tongue inside her mouth until he got drunk on the sweet taste of her. Finally, he had her in his arms and in his bed again. Harry! She moaned as she threaded her fingers deep into his hair and kissed him back. Her breath whispered sensually across his tongue, a caress that had his blood roaring in his ears.
Good heavens, kissing you is addictive.
Urging her lips apart to capture more of her honeyed essence, he kissed her with all the passion consuming him. She tasted incredible, so sweetly pure, yet with an edge of ravenous hunger that matched his own. He bit down on her lower lip, and when she gasped, he licked the spot, and groaned as she nipped his lower lip in return. Brutal need rushed through him, and he kissed her with complete abandon, enmeshing himself in her, and she kissed him just as fiercely in return, stealing his breath with one urgent kiss after another. This was what he craved, this kind of raw intimacy with a woman who matched him in every way, and not just any woman, but the one lying directly underneath him. How had he gotten so fortunate that she'd asked him if he might spend his nights with her? He pulled back, only an inch, his head swimming and thoughts fogging over. "Harry?" Her face wavered. Black dots danced in front of his eyes, and drat it, no! Now was not the time for the dratted laudanum to kick in. "Lie down," she murmured, and tipped him onto his back. "The opiate is taking effect." His limbs softened like jelly, and he closed his eyes against the disorientation, although everything kept spinning, the darkness pulling at him, taking him deeper toward full and utter oblivion. "Go to sleep and rest," she murmured in his ear. "Stay with me. If you leave, I'll be lost." "I'll stay," she promised. And the dark took him completely away. Chapter 10. Hand to her mouth, Julia remained beside Harry in his bed, a dreamy smile tugging at the corners of her lips. His brow had relaxed as he'd fallen asleep from the opiate, his long sooty lashes cresting his cheeks, and the fire in his hearth casting its golden glow over him. He looked so rumpled and delicious with stubble glinting on his jaw, his black breeches hanging loose on his hips and his chest bare. She leaned over him, spread her hand over the solid width of his chest, and gasped as his muscles flexed under her touch. Heat surged through her core, along with a boldness she'd never known before. With him oblivious to her presence, she traced one finger down the centre of his muscled chest, smoothing through the smattering of springy golden hair. She swept her fingers back and forth across his contoured middle, his body built deliciously hard. With her lips pressed to his ear, she drew her tongue along the soft whorls and nipped his lobe. He groaned in his sleep, a guttural sound that vibrated deep in his chest and escaped his mouth. Such a divine mouth, delicious and full. Kissing the firm side of his jaw, her heartbeat pounded an exhilarating tempo. This atrocious war could snatch a man's life away so quickly, but she'd now been given more time with him. She would grab a hold of that time and live it to its fullest. With one finger pressed to his beautiful mouth, she released a contented sigh, lowered her cheek to his chest and snuggled into his side. For the first night in 5 long nights, she could finally rest knowing he was safe and sound. Tiredness tugged at her, and she gave in to her need to rest. Her eyes flickered shut. The next morning, a paltry ray of dawn light flared through the open window, and Julia stretched languorously. When she opened her eyes, it was to the sight of Harry standing at the end of the bed in his black breeches. He was grinning, his amber eyes blazing like heated whiskey. She cleared her throat. "Good morning, Major Trentbury. It appears I'm still in your bed." "Good morning, Miss Chalmers. You most certainly are." "Has your head cleared from the laudanum?" "My mind is still a little fuzzy." He crawled up her body and murmured, "Did we agree that I could lavish you with kisses?" "Yes, then you succumbed to your medication." "I'm such a cad, and I do apologize profusely." "You're forgiven. How does your arm fare this morning?" "There isn't even a twinge of pain." Settling his body firmly over top of hers, he surrounded her in his heat, and pleasure rippled through her. "Oh, my!" She curled her toes and clutched the blue bed covers either side of her. Would you like me to remove your dressing and apply a clean one?" "No, you've not long applied this one, and if I haven't distracted you enough from my arm, then I'm doing a poor job of being your devoted friend." Growling hungrily, he swept one hand down her side. "Wait. Do you recall promising to court me with roses and diamonds?" She needed to make certain he'd fully recovered. "I did not." A grin as he sucked on her lower lip. She smiled softly, his touch heavenly. "You're my hussar, and no one else's." "Yes, I'm your hussar."
One more heavenly kiss, then he lifted his head, his amber eyes glowing with hunger. "There shall be no regrets between us. Not from this day forth, not one."
"No regrets," she whispered in return. "Kiss me again."
"Your wish is my command." He lowered his head, his mouth moving over hers with fierce hunger, his kisses flowing down her neck and along her shoulder. He held her safely in his arms, and never had she felt so cherished and protected. Thank goodness he'd returned from his mission without any great injury. Chapter 11. Needing to remain close to his sweet Julia, Harry settled beside her and held her in his arms after soothing his soul with plenty of kisses. "This is the most wondrous morning I've ever awoken to," he admitted.
"For me, too."
She snuggled, one nightgown-covered leg curled over his legs, her head on his shoulder, and the new day's sunshine streaming through his window. Trailing one finger back and forth across his chest, she softly smiled, and he tightened his hold on her, her presence alone easing the strain of the 5 long days in which he'd been parted from her. They'd been through so much together, and now he had no desire to be anywhere but here with her. He nuzzled into the silky length of her hair and breathed deep of her unique vanilla and cream fragrance. "Your scent is intoxicating," he rumbled. "And how I came to have the chamber next to yours during this awful war is a miracle."
"I'm incredibly glad for our connecting door."
"I am over the moon." He kissed her gently. "Which reminds me of something from last night. Why were your breasts bound? You never did explain why."
"I don't intend to, either."
Teasingly, she ran her finger along his bottom lip.
"We are dear friends and nothing more. I am not going to reveal all my secrets to you."
"Well, if I discover your breasts bound again, then I'll remove the wrappings myself, no matter where we might be." He kissed the tip of her adorable nose, then caught one of her long golden curls and coiled it around his finger. "I give you my word I will."
"If you dare, then I shall."
She frowned, then smiled as she dipped her head and kissed him, twining her tongue with his and plundering. He met her play for play in a duel which had them both panting when they finally broke their kiss.
Kissing you was—"
Her brow furrowed as she glanced out the window.
"Did you hear that?"
He tipped his ear toward the window and caught shouts from the guardsmen atop the barbican. A horn trumpeted, the long and eerie blast ricocheting through the fort. Then it blasted a second time, and he bounded from the bed and grasped the window-sill. The heavy sound of chains clanking reverberated across the inner courtyard as the portcullis rose from within the stone-arched entrance gate. Horses pounded in, hussars atop their mounts, dust swirling. Something dreadful was afoot. Chapter 12. Julia hurried to the window and snuck under Harry's arm where he gripped the window-sill. From in front of him, his arms bracketed either side of her, she waited as guards moved along the barbican toward the T-pole protruding from the highest point.
They began moving the signals in preparation for a message, one they would soon pass along to the next poled station on the following hilltop.
"There's an incoming message."
Harry brushed his chin over the top of her head, the heat of his body burning against her back. She held her breath as the words took form and whispered, "Attack force coming."
"On Sobral," Harry murmured as the next words were relayed.
"No, not Sobral." Turning, she gripped his forearms. "My father still remains at Sobral. Other jobs there have come to his attention."
"I'm aware he's still at Sobral. The officers mentioned it during the meeting I had in the war room on my return."
He glanced over the top of her head, deep worry lines furrowing his brow.
"There's another message coming through."
She spun around and waited anxiously as the words took form on the T-pole.
"All British-Portuguese divisions," Harry muttered, "will report to Sobral immediately."
He was being called into battle, and she had to let him go. "You've only just returned."
"I'm sorry, but orders are orders."
He kissed her hard, then strode to his wardrobe and flapped out a pair of breeches. She gave him her back as he changed into a clean pair.
"I'm decent."
He donned his regimental shirt, and she turned as he unfolded a neckcloth and fisted it in his hand.
"Julia, I hate this infuriating war."
"So do I." She was at his side in a heartbeat, taking the neckcloth from his clenched fingers and gently looping it around his neck. After she knotted it, she removed his royal blue dolman from his wardrobe and held it out for him to push his arms through. He shrugged it on, and she buttoned it and smoothed the front, right over the silver-corded embellishment. "Harry, if Portugal falls, then Napoleon will soon come after England."
"No one will be safe from the Corsicans' terrorising ways if that happens."
He secured his sword belt, choosing his wooden scabbard over his steel scabbard. Most of their hussars would do so, in order to ensure they rode lighter on horseback, and that they limited any additional scraping of steel should they need to employ stealthy reconnaissance on the battlefield. The battlefield. The full reality of the moment hit her as those two words ricocheted through her head. Her heart clenched in on itself, and a tear slipped free and streaked down her cheek. She hadn't had nearly long enough with him, had wanted to awaken with him each and every morning for as long as possible, to embrace the fierce beating of his heart against hers as he held her close. This war had robbed her of any further time they might have together, unless, of course, he wished to continue with their devoted friendship following the battle. Not that either of them would know where they might be. He was a hussar, a soldier who fought for the 18th. He would be deployed to wherever he was needed next. She was here to aid her father in the construction of the lines, which now stood strong, or mostly they did. For this brief moment in time their paths had crossed, and if not for the war, they would never have met. Now she had to watch him sheath his sabre at his right hip and tuck his pistol into the belt on his left. It tore at her heart to see him readying himself for the battle. Goodness, but each and every day was one he fought to remain alive, and she had to help him fight too. Without a word, she fetched his busby from the top shelf in his wardrobe, the hussar headdress always worn by his regiment when marching into war. As he stood silently before her, she placed his hat atop his head, as pride, awe, and immense fear filled her. "Major Trentbury, if you suffer even one nick of a blade, I'll be furious with you. Do you understand?"
"Most of the ladies wishing their men farewell don't berate them."
"What do they do?" She searched his gaze and caught the flicker of need flaring within his own eyes. "Tell me."
"They promise all sorts of wicked things instead."
That flicker blazed brighter, the need stronger. "I see. As in wicked ways a lady might comfort her man upon his return?" She couldn't halt the smile that lifted her lips. If he needed her to speak wickedly to him, then she would.
"That is exactly what I mean, my precious siren."
"Then allow me to make you some wicked promises." She sashayed up against him, swirling one finger down his chest. "When you return, I promise to embrace any wickedness you desire." Sucking in a harsh breath, he touched his forehead to her forehead.
"Promise me that you'll never take any other man to your bed."
"There will only ever be you." She couldn't even imagine wanting another man the way she wanted him. Touching her lips to his, she murmured, "Major Harry Trentbury, on my heart, I give you my word that I will only ever lie beside you at night."
"You drive me mad with want."
Pressing his lips to the pulse beating frantically at the base of her throat, he swayed into her, and she embraced the tide of heat he sent rushing through her. May it always be that way. The last thing she wanted to do was step back, but step back she did. Wrapping her arms around herself, she sniffed. "Journey safely, my hussar."
"I will."
He collected his embroidered hussar saddlecloth from the upper shelf in his wardrobe, and with the shabraque folded over his arm, he strode to the door. He swung it open and glanced back at her, his gaze so intense.
"Julia, I've never adored or detested a woman more than you."
"The feeling is mutual." She winked at him. "Make certain you beat the French, soundly and thoroughly."
"We shall send them scuttling home. I promise you, we will."
He blew her a kiss and closed the door behind him. He was gone, taking her beaten and bruised heart with him. Fisting her hands, she paced his bedchamber, her worry for both her father and Harry pummelling through her. Drat it all, but she wouldn't be able to remain patiently here when those she cared about were in danger. Of course Harry would be furious if she followed him, but heaven help her, she couldn't sit idly by and just wait here while he fought for her and his country. Perhaps she could don the facade of Jamie and follow the troops as they left St. Vincent's? She really did have a terribly wild spirit. Decision made. Hurrying, she returned to her chamber and closed their connecting door. Bindings first. She wrapped her breasts as flat to her chest as possible, slid a black tunic over her head, and tugged on black breeches. With her hair pulled into a low ponytail, she poked it back up under her hair close to her scalp, then secured her brown cap over top. The pièce de résistance, her coal dust smeared across her jaw and cheeks. Weapons. From her trunk, she selected 2 daggers which Anteros had gifted to her on her 18th birthday, a gift only Anteros would ever consider giving a girl. She strapped one into a leather sheath around her ankle and secured the other at her wrist. From her dresser drawer, she scooped the leather pouch of herbs Una had given her, and just in case she had need of them, tossed the pouch into her satchel. She stuffed an assortment of female and male clothing inside her bag, enough to see her through while she was away. Taking a deep breath, she bounded into the passageway and rapped on Una's bedchamber door a little farther down the corridor. She couldn't leave without telling Una where she'd be. When Una opened the door and took one look at her, the healer nodded as if she already knew what she was about to say. "You're leaving with the soldiers and journeying to Sobral, aren't you?" "Yes. I must find father and ensure he remains safe. I also fear for the Major as well." "My dear child, have you given the Major your heart?" Una pulled her into her arms and held her tight. "It's all right if you have." "No," an answer that rang with mistruth. "Yes, but only a little of it." "You aren't the sort of woman to give only a little." "Our relationship can't be any more than we've already decided it shall be. Surely you haven't forgotten my unknown parentage." "We aren't defined by where we have come from, only by whom we choose to be. Think on those words, my sweet one." Una kissed her cheek, her tartan skirt swaying. "Send word if you have need of me. I will come." "I love you." She squeezed Una tight, then released her. Hurrying, she raced along the warren of passageways toward the kitchens. This might be a last-minute decision to leave, but not one in which she'd leave unprepared. Provisions for the journey would be needed. She joined the mad rush of maids scurrying about in the kitchens as they packed food for their troops. Young Otis knelt in the corner over a tub of water, dunking flasks and filling them. Holding a finger to her lips, she snuck one of the flasks from him and hooked it to her belt. Then she darted across to the table, pinched a square of cloth, and wrapped bread, cheese, and cold meats into it, before slotting her provisions inside her pack. A quick squeeze of Otis's shoulder as she left. Then she merged in with the throng of soldiers in full battle regalia who'd gathered in the courtyard awaiting their departure. A regiment of dragoon guards mounted up and thundered out the gate, dust swirling. The heavy cavalry followed next, then the light cavalry took the rear. She searched for Harry, but found no sign of him. He must already have ridden out. Perfect. In her ruse of Jamie, she'd be able to join the end of the procession without his knowledge. She hurried through the gate where armed guards patrolled the battlements high above, then pulled her cap lower and joined the tail end of men marching on foot after the riders. Her satchel bumped on her back as she trekked along. Chapter 13. Harry's chest tightened with each mile he rode farther away from Julia. When his papa had been alive, he'd taken him aside and warned him that there would come a time in his life when he met a lady who consumed his thoughts. His advice when that time arrived was that he must do everything he could to guard and protect her. That time was now. He hadn't told Julia of how deeply his emotions for her ran, not with this dreaded battle looming, and he couldn't promise her anything until his life was once again his to live, but the moment he could, he would. Everything had changed between them these past few days. He simply couldn't let her go, no matter what society expected or demanded of him. "Penny for your thoughts?" Poole asked as he rode alongside him. "Or should I just ask if you're thinking about the Professor's golden-haired daughter?" "I never thought it would happen, that I would find someone like her so far from England, or during a war to end all wars." Snorting under his breath, he rode on. "I love her." "Then marry her," a wink from Poole. "Winterly will understand, and if he doesn't, then browbeat him until he does." "You're a champion, my friend." His brother would understand, particularly when Winterly was carved from the same cloth as their father, both of them understanding and accepting. He'd been born into a loving family, where each family member cared for and cherished the other. If he loved Julia, then his family would love her too. He would just need to convince Julia of that. As the day wore on, the sun slowly slid lower in the sky. A smear of grey clouds hazed the horizon, where even darker clouds now brewed. Drat, they'd just gotten through one difficult storm, and now another one threatened. Storms in these parts always hit with great ferocity, winds and rain which ripped through the valleys and whistled over the craggy hilltops. With the afternoon finally giving way to the evening, he caught sight of the soft glow of campfires burning in the distance. "Sobral," he murmured to Poole as he motioned to the campfires. "We're almost there." "We'll arrive in good time." Poole nudged his horse onward. A short while later, they trotted into camp where thousands of English and Portuguese soldiers sat grouped together around fires, the men having trekked in from other forts along the first and second lines. Tents had been assembled in long rows, with makeshift stables erected around the perimeter. Horses had been secured to rails hammered between posts. He and Poole dismounted, looped their reins to a rail, and uncinched their saddles. Harry brushed his destrier down and fed his mount an extra handful of oats before clasping Poole's shoulder. "I need to find Professor Chalmers and reassure him that Julia remains at St. Vincent's with her brother and Una. I'm sure the Professor would appreciate the update. I'll find Wellington and inform him of the arrival of our soldiers from St. Vincent's, although I imagine he's already noted the extra men coming into camp." Poole disappeared into the dark. Harry petted between his horse's ears, and the animal bumped its muzzle affectionately into his side. Leaving his mount behind, he slung his satchel over one shoulder and made his way through camp. He weaved in and around the campfires where men chatted as they sat on the grass, the lick of golden red flames highlighting the faces of the soldiers he'd soon be fighting alongside. As he neared a gurgling stream, he picked his way down the slope to the water's edge, removed his skin from his belt, and crouched as he filled it. Gulping from the rim, he quenched his thirst, then filled the skin a second time. "Father!" A lad wearing black breeches and a black tunic, who almost blended in with the night save for a few golden locks poking out from under his brown cap, ran alongside the embankment and bounded into the arms of Professor Chalmers, the very man he was looking for. Not the lad, though. Gritting his teeth, he snarled under his breath. Devil take it! Jamie must have joined their troops as they'd left. This wasn't the place for a lad of only 16. Aggravated, he rose to his feet. "Jamie!" The Professor wrapped one arm around his son's shoulders and steered him toward the rear of the camp. "Una sent a message along the signal stations to me. She warned me that you'd set out after the soldiers from St. Vincent's." Harry climbed the embankment and followed silently in their wake. "I couldn't remain behind, Father." The lad missed a step, and the Professor caught his son's elbow and kept him on his feet. "Are you well?" the Professor asked Jamie. "Tired, that's all. I've walked a great distance today." "I have a tent where you can rest for the night, although I can't remain with you. I'm expected back at the command post. Wellington has requested I remain on hand for any assistance I can offer. I've been working on extending the firing range of the cannons, and been rather successful at it." "How close are the French?" "Our scouts have reported that they'll be here within a day, one contingent led by Masséna, and the other Junot." "Does Wellington have a plan of attack?" "He intends on utilising his favoured reverse slope defence, and fierce counter-attacks to blunt and reduce Masséna and Junot's advance when they descend upon us. The redoubts and concentrated artillery forts we've constructed behind the protected bastions will certainly hold up against anything our enemy's infantry attempt. We're also in the process of plugging any holes along the lines with our own reserves. When the battle begins, we must be fully prepared and at our strongest." Harry followed as stealthily as possible, until they arrived in the near dark before a small copse of trees well beyond the campfires, where a dozen tents for civilians had been erected. In front of one tent, the Professor faced his son and gripped his shoulders. "We're still expecting 2 more regiments to arrive, one from the south and another from Alhandra. Wellington received notification through the signal stations that they'll be here before dawn. I've always been impressed by Wellington. He's a born leader, intelligent and keen. His knowledge of running campaigns against our enemy vast. The boy glanced toward the moon, which peeked out from behind the darkened clouds, before sliding back behind another seething mass of black. I'm so glad these lines now provide us with a firm defensive position. Yes, the construction of them has all led to this one moment in time. The professor removed Jamie's satchel from his son's shoulder and tucked the bag inside the tent flap before eyeing his son again. Come and find me when you awaken in the morning. I'm not leaving the command post. Father, wait! Jamie grasped his father's arm as he turned to walk away. I love you. I love you too. Pulling his son into his arms, the professor squeezed Jamie tight before he released him and walked away into the dark. Chapter 14. Julia's heart heaved as her father disappeared into the dark towards the command post which sat high on the hill, the line of the roof just visible beyond the campfires. Exhaustion beat at her, rest most certainly needed. She slipped inside the darkened confines of the tent, the flap swaying behind her. Half bent over, she groped about and tried to get her bearings. She stepped on a thick pile of pelts with a bedroll atop it, and got down onto her knees. She kicked off her boots, found the pillow at one end, and eased down. The tent opening swayed again, a light breeze blowing in along with a shadowed form. Onto one elbow she pushed. Did you forget something, Father?
It's Major Trentbury, not your father.
Those words whistled out roughly from between the Major's clenched teeth.
What on earth are you doing here, Jamie?
Oh, Major, good evening. Her heart raced a mile a minute.
Good evening? That's all you have to say?
A thunderous exclamation, and the slam of his hands on his hips. It was just as well she couldn't see any more of him than his outline. I'm with my father, which is where I should be.
No, you should have remained at St. Vincent's, so you could look after your sister.
He drew closer in the dark and loomed over her. Julia can look after herself. She cleared her throat and deepened her tone. I mean, my sister is aware I'm here and had no issue with my decision to leave.
You are like 2 peas in a pod.
He dropped his satchel with a thump and rustled about as he removed some of his clothes. What are you doing?
Removing my dolman and hat.
The clatter of his boots came next. Major, you can't bed down here with me.
I can, and I will.
He knelt on the pelt next to her and heaved her over, then rolled in and settled on his back.
I'll guard you through the night. Close your eyes and sleep.
I hardly need guarding when I'm amongst thousands of our own soldiers.
Our enemy draws nearer, and I'm not leaving you alone out here in this tent, which is rather far removed from the main camp.
I'm armed.
What with?
An exasperated huff. 2 daggers. She slid one from her wrist sheath, and he nabbed her wrist and pinned it to the bed before she could blink.
That isn't enough,
he growled, as he glared from over top of her, just the whites of his eyes visible in the dark. Eyes that narrowed considerably as he sniffed.
You smell just like your sister. How is that?
I beg your pardon? She gulped. He dipped his head to her neck and sniffed again. Then he whipped away her cap and tossed it aside. He groaned, his breath coming harder and faster as he plucked her ponytail free and ran his fingers through her locks.
Good grief. Don't tell me that you're Julia.
I'm, not Julia? She tried with an uncertain tone.
Liar. Now I know why you bound your breasts.
He snarled under his breath.
Why, Julia? Why would you disguise yourself as a lad?
I had no other choice.
Of course you had another choice.
In the inky dark, he patted her flattened chest and muttered and cursed.
Remove the bindings, or else I'll do it for you.
All right, all right. She pulled her shirt hem from her breeches, stuck her hands underneath the linen, and unknotted the bindings from around her breasts. Please, now we've been given this second chance to be together, let's just be together. No more arguments.
I should be flaying you, not giving in to you.
His hands shook as he gripped her waist.
Your father has clearly been aiding you with this disguise.
Yes, and Una too. Goodness, why aren't you kissing me yet? She unbuttoned his shirt, pushed the royal blue linen from his shoulders, and pressed her palms against his heavily muscled chest.
I'll never forgive you for lying to me.
He groaned and muttered some more. I'm sorry, but I need to be Jamie from time to time.
Julia.
With painstaking slowness, he smoothed a finger along her lips, from one corner to the other, then back again. So sensual, his touch divine, which sent her heart pounding into a hungry and needy beat. Kiss me, Harry. Don't let me go.
No one shall ever tear us apart again, not this dratted war, or anyone else who wishes to attempt such a feat.
He dipped his head to hers, then he kissed her, diverting her thoughts and sending them cascading far away as he plundered her mouth. He kissed her ravenously, this man right where he belonged, with her. This was heaven, being held in his arms, his hold so treasured. They lay together, kissing and talking long into the night until she closed her eyes and allowed her tiredness to drag her under. Sleep claimed her, as it did her hussar. Peaceful, beautiful sleep. Chapter 15. Julia awoke as a pinch of dawn light hazed the sides of the tent. She pushed the top covering of the bedroll aside and ogled Harry's muscled chest, his regimental breeches donned and bare feet poking over the end of their makeshift bed. She was such a vixen. Her belly fluttered with sudden nerves as she ran her fingers over the squared ridges lining his abs. As she did, he opened his eyes, the striking amber colour shimmering a heated shade. She touched her lips to his soft lips and whispered, I believe we should extend our agreement. Una provided me with some herbs which I can take to prevent pregnancy.
I must warn you that after last night, there isn't a chance I can let you go.
His breath whistled from between his lips, his stomach muscles tightening into even more rigid squares.
Which means we need to do more than extend. We need to talk about our future. You've certainly ruined me for all other women.
There can be no possible long-lasting future. She would never demand more of him than she already had. My parentage is soiled, or have you forgotten, my hussar? He gritted his teeth, tension flowing from him.
Miss Julia Chalmers, my future is now invariably linked with...
Shouts boomed from outside, and a horn trumpeted.
Confound it! That has to be the French.
Harry surged to his feet and dragged on his scattered clothes. No, no, no! She wasn't ready to have him torn away from her yet. She heaved to her feet and snatched her satchel. Harry, I'm coming with you.
No, you're going to remain here where you'll be safe. And that's an order.
Grasping her face in his hands, he kissed her, then rushed out of the tent with his sword belt in his hand. He'd gone, and she stared at the swaying tent flap, her heart wrenching in two. Never would she allow him to ride into battle without telling him how much she... Oh, goodness! She would die if he died. She hauled out fresh clothes from the top of her satchel and donned a red riding habit with leather-soled half-boots. She didn't bother with her hair, which would likely be a riotous mess, but hurried outside and weaved through the chaos that had overtaken the encampment. Uniformed men rushed about, and in the meagre dawn light she darted out of the way of soldiers riding past within inches and thundering down into the valley. "Julia!" Father hurried toward her, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose, and his blue greatcoat flapping about his trouser-clad legs. "The French marched through the night, and our infantry division to the north has been driven back from our farthest defensive position. Our cavalry now rides out with the hope of aiding our infantry in seizing back the outpost." The 18th Royal Hussars flew past her like the wind, grim determination slashing their faces, Harry racing alongside Captain Poole. Harry had his head tucked low against his destrier's neck, and he became a blur among the swarm of riders now pouring down the rise toward the pass. No, she'd missed her chance to speak to him. "Come with me." Holding her elbow, Father steered her up the rise toward the command post, to the highest point which overlooked the rugged and inhospitable terrain to the north. Under his breath, Father muttered, "In the event there becomes a requirement to fall back, we retreat first to Perro Negro, where a secondary unit has been placed at Wellington's main headquarters. All injured men will be taken to the infirmary at Quebeco. What can I do? She itched to do something, anything, to be of help wherever she possibly could. Unfortunately, all either you and I can do right now is wait. Father lifted his telescope to his eye and focused his sight to the north, where gunfire peppered and echoed through the valley toward them. This senseless war had already taken thousands upon thousands of lives, and today she didn't doubt it would take even more. She shuddered as hot tears burned behind her eyes. She blinked and forced them down. Tears wouldn't aid her, or the soldiers all around her. No, she needed to show only strength and resilience just as they did. Another round of gunfire to the north sent heavy plumes of black soaring into the sky, which was already heavy with grey cloud as it had been yesterday. Another storm threatened. Soldiers marched out on foot, their faces grim and gazes on the battlefield ahead. "Father, may I use your telescope?" Her father would never hide the truth of the battle from her. Of course. He passed her his scope, and she held it to her eye as he continued. "Do you see our light dragoons?" "Yes, they're charging across difficult ground." Thankfully, though, their soldiers had been fighting together for years under Wellington's command, and had faced far worse hurdles than what this rugged countryside offered. "Are they riding directly towards the outpost?" "Yes, which belongs to our 1st Division, led by Spencer. Keep it in your sight, and the men in your prayers." "I will, Father." She would pray constantly, vigilantly, endlessly. She needed Harry back. Chapter 16. A fierce battle cry rang out, a crescendo that echoed all around Harry as he streamed across the valley with Poole at his side, his fellow hussars galloping in lines across the width of the pass, as murky dawn light hazed the horizon and grey cloud dropped in overhead. Across the other side of the valley, the mounted troops of their enemy fisted their sabres in the air and roared. "All to arms!" Harry yelled to his men and thrust his sabre high. "We fight together!" a bellow from Poole as he joined in his shout. "I'll be right beside you, my friend." "And I you," he promised Poole in return. With fury riding him hard, Harry clashed dead centre with the French as he swung from atop his mount. A thundering roar echoed from behind as their dragoons ploughed across the battlefield and joined in their fight. Hard on their heels, their guardsmen entered the fray with their hatchet-pointed sabres swinging. Hardened soldiers who'd spent years fighting across the continent, who'd amassed great skills, now came up against one another in a battle to end all battles. Steadily he swung, and sweat poured from his body. Their cavalry formed columns and positioned themselves everywhere. His arm got numb and his vision wavered as the clouds opened, and a rainstorm hit as hard as any bombshell could. Rain drenched the hills and flowed down into the pass, making the ground a mucky sludge he had to force his horse through. "Be prepared to die!" An enemy soldier bounded out from behind a heavy bush. Harry's horse reared up on its back legs, and he growled as he slid from his saddle. His boots sank deep into the soggy mud, and he heaved to free himself. Barely in time, he blocked his enemy's swift blow, their swords clashing dead centre, steel ringing loud against steel. Another of his enemies swung in behind him, and he ducked the deadly swipe. 2 against 1. Drat it all. These bloodthirsty Frenchmen fought dirty. "I've got one, you take the other," Poole shouted as he bounded from his horse and swung in against the opponent at Harry's back. He heaved, and together he and Poole laid down their 2 rivals, but not without an intense battle and a fierce fight to the end. As the hours passed and night finally fell, he struck a look all around. They'd made good headway this day in pushing the French farther back from Massena and Junot's dual attack. Progress, although they had a long way still to go. Today, they fought not only for freedom for Portugal, but also to keep Napoleon from bringing his dratted war to England's shores. He'd certainly never allow any harm to befall his brother, his mamma, and his sisters. So too he fought for the woman he'd left behind in camp. He'd never allow any of his enemy to get to Julia. In the wet, dreary dark, men grunted while he rallied his fellow hussars together. All around, the battlefield suddenly went eerily quiet. "The French have retreated for the night," he uttered to his comrades. "Yes, but they'll be back by dawn." Poole staggered around his horse as he patted the animal and checked for any injury. His fellow hussars did the same with their mounts. Harry clutched his side as he stepped around his beast in the pitch black of the night. He'd taken several brutal blows during the day, and he didn't doubt his body would be heavily bruised come the morning. Assured all was well and no harm had come to his steed, he nodded at his men, and they silently walked their horses through the flooded pass towards the edge, where they thankfully found another dozen men from their regiment. The able-bodied soldiers among them tended to the wounded, and when the rattle of a cart broke the silence, Harry waved the driver down, and he and Poole removed supplies from the back of the wagon before carefully transferring their wounded onto the platform. From the supplies, he fed his horse water and oats, then took the first watch with Poole as the others slept in a huddle together to share their body warmth. Numbly, he chewed salted meat from the rations, before handing over his watch to the soldier who'd awoken to take his position for their change in shift. On his back on a patch of wet, weedy grass, he closed his eyes against the pall of black overhead and brought Julia's sweet image to the forefront of his mind. He drifted with thoughts only of her, although all too soon a blaze of blood-red hazed the dawn sky, which heralded the beginning of another hard day of battle. The fighting resumed in full force. Alongside his brothers in arms, he released a blood-curdling battle cry, and once more rushed forward atop his horse into the fray of their fierce enemy who wouldn't relent. "Stay close," he yelled to Poole. "We're strongest when we fight side by side." "Always," Poole promised as he slashed his blade against his adversaries. They desperately needed to send the French scurrying back to their own land. Harry grunted as he met two attackers head-on. He struck first one and then the other, pushing hard to ensure not even one of their rivals could successfully pass them by. With his fellow hussars at his back, they pressed forward and fought with all their might, while high above the stormy clouds of yesterday opened up once more. Rain hit, a downpour with thunder rumbling and jagged slashes of lightning spearing through the sky. It rained for hours upon hours, endless rain and endless fighting. Bone-weary, he and his fellow soldiers were plastered with mud, hungry and exhausted, but still they fought on, until they managed to push their enemy back across the rutted valley. Opponent after opponent came at him, and he swung and struck, each hit sending the man he fought toppling from his horse. Hands shaking with the blood he'd spilled this day, he could take no more death. "Behind you, Harry!" He twisted at Poole's bellow and fell from his horse, his enemy's blade whistling past his neck with only a whisper to spare. Slamming into the ground, he hit his head with a clunk on a rock, and stars burst behind his eyes. He fought to hold on, his enemy leering at him from overtop, his sword arm raised. Then the man's head was gone, Poole having sliced it clean away. Blood spurted everywhere. He tried to reach for his friend, but everything went dark. Chapter 17. For 2 days straight, gunfire had echoed across the land, and now the rumble of thunder boomed overhead. Jagged streaks of lightning lit the night sky as Julia checked every cart which returned with fallen British and Portuguese soldiers. None of the carts held her hussar, which meant he was still alive and fighting for their freedom. Father gripped her arm as he joined her, his face wet and lined with exhaustion, likely the same as hers was. "My dear, we've received confirmation that the outpost the French troops seized from us is once again in our hands. The 1st Infantry Division along with the 18th Hussars have sent the French fleeing." "Are you certain?" She searched Father's face, uncertain if she'd heard him correctly. "Yes, Julia, most certain." He pulled her into his arms and hugged her, the heavy rain pummeling them both, her riding habit skirts drenched. "The battle is now turning in our favour. Masséna and Junot are losing this battle." For the first time since the battle had begun, her heart lightened with hope. More thunder, more rain. It pelted the ground and left a muddy hole in its path. An hour later, a great roar resounded through the dark as the first of their weary soldiers returned from the battlefield on heavy feet. Huge cheers reverberated from those in camp, and anxious, she joined the throng of carts bumping down the rise into the slippery valley below. She would help bring their wounded and dead out, right after she'd found Harry. With a lamp in hand, she scrambled off the wagon and shouted Harry's name in the deathly dark. Clutching her skirts, She weaved around bushes, her voice all too soon going hoarse as one long hour after another passed. When she stumbled into a group of hussars from the 18th carrying their comrades out, she grasped one of the men's arms. "Please, have any of you seen Major Harry Trentbury? I'm searching for him."
"He's with Captain Poole, miss."
"Where? Where is Poole?" Rain soaked her through, and she shoved her wet hair from her face.
"I'm sorry."
He shook his head, his gaze going to the ground before slowly rising to her face again.
"Last I saw, well, the Major was covered in blood and had lost consciousness. Poole slung him over his destrier and rode fast for the infirmary."
"Covered in blood?" She swayed, and he grasped her arm.
"Poole's headed to Quebeco, miss. If the Major is alive, you'll find him there."
Chapter 18. A hefty haze clouded Harry's head as he pushed through the dark and lifted his weighted eyelids open. Overhead, a canvas ceiling rippled in the breeze and sunlight streamed through. He squeezed his eyes shut again, the glare too much, then slowly opened them in blinking intervals until he could see more clearly. He was in an infirmary, with other British soldiers lying on pallets just as he was. Shoving his elbows behind him, he pushed upright, but unfortunately slithered back down again. How annoying! His limbs were as wobbly as jelly, and dizziness had his head spinning. Poole clasped his shoulder, his face suddenly coming into view.
"You look awful." "Where am I?"
he rasped, his throat terribly raw and dry.
"Our infirmary at Quebeco, and in case you were wondering, we soundly thrashed the French and sent them scuttling back home."
Relief poured through him, then a stab of pain. He needed to see someone important to him, someone he couldn't quite remember, someone who remained slightly out of his range of vision, someone who... Darkness took him under. Heat washed over him, stifling and hot. He scrubbed his eyes open and slowly blinked to bring the infirmary back into view.
"Captain Poole hasn't long left."
A bearded soldier lay within arm's reach on the pallet next to him, his face unfamiliar, although not his bloodied uniform piled at the end of his pallet, which stated he belonged to the British 4th Infantry Division.
"Where has he gone?"
His head throbbed as if horses pounded within. "Wellington requested a meeting with several of the officers. Poole's been at your bedside for the past 2 days, but had to leave for the meeting. He'll return soon enough."
"I've been here 2 days already."
"Yes, as has the lady over yonder who's been tending to your injured head. You've got a whopping bump on the back, my friend." The soldier pointed to a woman across the other side of the infirmary, a woman wearing a powder-blue kirtle with capped sleeves and an apron knotted at her waist. With her golden locks piled high on her head, a few wispy strands floating free across her neck, she wiped her brow in the stifling heat of the tent. He frowned as he tried to place her, but got nothing.
"She doesn't appear familiar."
"Don't tell her that, or you might get another thump to the head." Smiling, the man extended his hand. "We haven't met before, but I'm John Brewerton."
"Major Harry Trentbury."
"Good, you know your name." "I'm aware of it. Poole informed me."
"Well, I'm mightily glad I still recall it."
He shook Brewerton's hand, and when he settled back on his pallet, he couldn't help but stare at the woman at the basin as she wrung out a cloth. She had a small waist, generous hips, and full lips with a dainty chin that had him wanting to kiss it. His chest suddenly heaved at the distance between them, then a soft breeze whispered through the opening of the tent, and brought with it the fragrance of vanilla and cream. Her scent, and he was certain of it. It swirled about his senses, and... Sweet mercy! He gripped the bedsheet either side of him. "I'll let the lady know you're awake." Brewerton slid his legs over the side, one arm heavily bandaged as he eased onto his feet and limped away. He tried to recall the recent battle, but not one memory stirred. How frustrating. Brewerton spoke to the lady, then hobbled out of the tent. Ever so slowly, she turned, and catching her breath, clutched her chest. Her brown eyes welled with tears as she stared at him, then 2 trickled free and streaked down her pale cheeks, those 2 tears ripping his heart in 2. He'd been the one to cause her pain. What a cad he was! Without a word, He lifted a hand, and she stumbled across the tent toward him. "Are you truly awake?" She gripped his fingers.
"I believe so."
He frowned as he tried to place her voice, but still he got nothing.
"I'm sorry, but do I know you?"
"Yes." She gulped, that one word coming out all strangled. "The doctor feared you might not have all your memories after suffering such a terrible hit to your head." She leaned in, lifted his chin up, and wiped his brow with the damp cloth she had in hand. "Your fever seems to have broken. How do you feel, other than for the loss of memory?"
"I remember Poole. Tell me your name."
"How about you tell me your last thought or memory?"
"I recall travelling through the main gate of St. Vincent's, of being sent on an assignment there, to aid the engineers in the building of the lines of Torres Vedras. I was to report to Wellington."
"You've been living at St. Vincent's for the past 6 months, while I've been there a year." Intently she watched him. "The knock you took has clearly done some damage."
"Some?"
His breath whooshed from him.
"I've lost 6 dratted months of my life."
"Yes, but at least you still have your life. That's all that matters." Concern swam in her eyes as she sat on the pallet beside him. "Memories can resurface, but one's life cannot."
"Exactly how do we know each other?"
"My father is an engineer."
"I recall Poole telling me I was at Quebeco."
"That's right." She turned his arm a little and examined a wound on his bicep, where stitches appeared almost ready to remove. She lowered his arm and dabbed his brow with the cool cloth. "We've spoken often, worked together, argued and bickered and such. That's how you and I know each other."
"If we've argued and bickered, then why have you been caring for me while I've been out of it?"
She smiled, so sweetly, a teasing glint lighting her soulful brown eyes. "My family have taken rooms in the village."
"That's not what I asked you."
He caught her hand and gently unfurled her fingers from around the cloth. Carefully, he pressed her palm against his cheek and closed his eyes as needy emotions rushed through him. He half moaned, half sighed, as he nuzzled his cheek into her soft palm. "Harry." She murmured his name, and he opened his eyes. When he did, she smiled. "You shall soon be sailing home to your family, sir. Wellington has granted you leave now that the French have been given a sound beating."
"I can't leave you."
An admission which surged with rightness in his chest. "My father has been granted leave as well, now that the bulk of our work here is done. Lisbon has been saved, and we too shall be returning home to England." She rose to her feet, her hand slipping from his cheek. "Do you wish to visit the privy?"
"I do."
"Come, then." She leaned forward and whispered in his ear. "On your feet, my hussar."
"Your hussar?"
"Yes, you're my hussar while I'm tending to you in this infirmary." She laid a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Take things slowly, though, as you find your feet."
"Right, slowly."
His head still swam, and dizzy, he lugged in a deep breath, the pale blue linen of his infirmary nightshirt rather scratchy against his skin.
"Where, by chance, would I find my uniform?" he asked as he slowly stood.
"Your uniform is being laundered and mended, although your weapons are right here on the table beside you." She motioned to a wobbly side table holding an oil lamp, his sabre, pistol, and daggers.
"Thank you. A soldier should always have his weapons close at hand."
"Yes, he should, and Captain Poole promised to bring your satchel from the encampment on his return. He's presently meeting with Wellington, in case you weren't aware."
"Brewerton said so. I haven't forgotten Captain Poole. He and I have fought together for several years during my time with the hussars."
He patted his head, the lump at the back making him wince as he touched it. He walked on toward the tent opening. "You'll be tender there for a few days." She gestured for him to go through the opening first. "The privy is outside."
"You called me by my first name before. I must have given you leave to do so."
"You did."
"I find that rather interesting."
His head cleared further as he stepped outside. Sunshine bounced off the rooftops of the houses in the nearby village, the infirmary tents erected within a meadow of thick grass surrounded by trees. Underfoot, The grass was soft and tickled the soles of his feet, while above birds soared through the endless blue of the sky. The warmth of the day and the woman at his side sent peace flowing through him. She motioned toward the privy door. "If you become woozy or faint, call out."
"I don't know your name to call out."
"I'm Nurse. That will do." She nudged him toward the door. "Take as long as you need." He took very little time indeed, his need to have her back in his sight throbbing with urgency through him. When he stepped out of the privy, he found her leaning against the wide trunk of a majestic oak tree 20 feet away. She'd released her hair from the topknot it had been contained within, and now her golden curls swayed loose and long down her back. He snuck up on her, slid a hand over her mouth, and swept her deeper into the copse of trees before pressing her back against the trunk of another large oak. Planting both his hands on the bark either side of her head, he leaned in until their bodies were flush against each other's.
"Nurse, I need you."
She said not a word, although she did sway her hips as the wind breezed through, the movement slow and sensual and breathtakingly beautiful. The branches rustled overhead, and her heady fragrance swirled all around him. "Can you hear the music?" she asked after several minutes had passed. "Someone is playing a mandolin, if I'm not mistaken." A trace of music filtered through, then the soft beat of a drum accompanied it.
"I hear it, and the drum."
More swaying of her hips. "The villagers here at Quebeco have been celebrating."
"Tell me more about it, the battle, that is."
He curved one hand over her right hip, then swept around to the small of her back. Gently he drew her into his arms before moving into a slow dance, his body and hers swaying in time with the music. "The French attacked, first seizing an outpost a few miles north of Sobral, which was held by Spencer's 1st Infantry Division. You and your fellow soldiers managed to seize it back 2 days later."
"The lines were being built in secret, correct?"
Or at least, that's what he recalled from 6 months prior. "Yes, and we kept that secret right up until a mere day before Napoleon's military commanders, Massena and Junot, attacked." She settled one hand on his shoulder as they danced about the trees. "During the battle we suffered casualties, not as many as we could have if the lines hadn't held." Slowly, she lowered her hand from his shoulder and rested it right over his heart. Her voice dropped to a mere whisper, her gaze locked with his, her eyes filling with anguish and pain. "Your injury occurred during the final minutes of the battle, nigh on midnight. My father and I searched in the dark for you on the battlefield. There were so many bodies, mud and gore. Then I found a group of hussars from the 18th, and one of the soldiers told me that Poole had brought you directly here to the infirmary. I feared I'd find you dead when I arrived."
"I would never leave you."
That he knew to the depths of his soul, regardless of his loss of memories. Covering her hand with his, he searched her gaze.
"I apologize sincerely for causing you pain."
"There is always pain in times of war." With a conciliatory sigh, she slipped her hand free of his and backed up a step. Then, straightening her shoulders, she clasped her hands behind her back. "The doctor will wish to take a look at you now that you're awake and more aware of your surroundings."
"The fresh air has done me a world of good, or perhaps it's being alone with you that has revived me. You are compelling my—"
He stepped closer, and she retreated another step with a shake of her head. "My what?" she urged.
"I don't know."
Drat it all. He wanted to bang his head against the tree. "Now that the French have retreated back to France, you and I shall both soon be parting ways. My father and I will return to our home in England. You will return to your family and the lady who is awaiting you."
"What lady?"
"Lady Amelia Evergreen. Does that name sound familiar?"
"No. Should it?"
"It will in time." She grasped her skirts and walked back through the trees, the grass sprinkled with sunshine where it filtered through the canopy high above. Never had he danced with a lady outside in a wooded meadow, or felt denied of her presence as he now currently did with her. He followed, albeit at a slower pace. Then he returned to his pallet, and sat while his enticing nurse spoke to an elderly doctor with a thick grey moustache, who stood across the other side of the tented infirmary. Together, the two of them strode to his bedside.
"Major Trentbury, it's good to see you're awake."
The doctor leaned over him, lifted one of his eyelids, lowered it, then lifted the other.
I've been told you've no recollection of the past 6 months. Is that correct? Yes, although I'm aware I took a nasty fall and a firm knock to my head. My hope is that my memory loss will be temporary.
He certainly didn't wish to go another day without knowing exactly how he'd come to know her, the woman before him who looked at him with such hunger in her eyes. He didn't doubt the look was identical to his own.
I see. Did you need to be prompted with being told your name? No, that I knew without any question. A good sign. Then turn around, if you will. I wish to examine the lump, which was quite sizable the last time I looked at it. Of course.
He did as the doctor bid, giving the aged man his back. The doctor prodded at his skull.
Yes, there's still deep bruising and swelling, although your fever appears to have broken. Until the lump settles down, it will be hard to know if your memories will return. Only time will tell, I'm afraid.
An encouraging nod from the doctor as he squeezed his shoulder.
If you recall more, I wish to hear about it. Thank you, and I shall inform you if any memories surface.
The doctor left him, and he crossed his arms as he raised a brow at his nurse.
You said your father is an engineer, that your family have rooms at the village. How many family members do you have?
Una, who is a dear friend of our family. I have a brother, too, named Jamie. He's keeping to himself, though, so I doubt you'll see him here at the infirmary. A breathy answer as she wrung her fingers together. My father is Professor Charles Chalmers.
Interesting, which must make you Miss Chalmers.
He tapped his crossed arms. It certainly does, and that's all the information you'll get on my name.
Tell me your first name.
No. Frowning, she leaned in and touched her fingers to his stubbly jaw. Would you care for a shave?
You're trying to divert our conversation, and yes, but only if it's you who is doing the shaving. I like having your hands on me.
Right, then wait here. Blushing, she headed to the corner supply cupboard, procured a basin, bar of soap, and cloths before returning, and setting her bundle on the side table between his pallet and Brewerton's, the soldier having returned at some point, the man now currently sleeping. After she'd seated herself beside him, she lathered soap and smeared bubbles along his jaw, then removed his dagger from his weaponry pile and slid the blade from his ear to his chin, her move smooth and firm. Does your head still ache? She asked him.
No, the throbbing eased while we were outside.
He wanted her closer, much closer, the need burning with a raw ache deep inside him.
Do you shave men often, Miss Chalmers?
I've been known to shave a few men when they've been too ill to do so for themselves. I promise I won't draw blood. Turning his cheek with one finger, she held the blade nice and close to his skin and ran it in a smooth line down. Then she shuffled closer, her outer thigh pressing firmly against his hip. He rested a hand on his leg, then allowed a slight brush of his fingers across her thigh. A rather outrageous move which anyone might catch if looking their way, but she didn't flinch one bit. She wriggled closer, as if needing his touch as much as he needed to give it. You keep your dagger meticulously sharp, my hussar. With a saucy smile, she shaved his other cheek.
Every soldier must.
That smile. Oh, good grief. His breathing got ragged rather quickly. She drew his dagger along the next portion under his chin and down his throat. Then she held her hand steady as she ran the blade right under his nose. She continued shaving him, trimming the bristles around his mouth before wiping the remaining suds away. Gently, she ran her fingers along the corners of his lips. That's smooth. He wanted to yank her into his lap and test that smoothness out on her.
Well, it's about dratted time you woke up.
Captain Poole strode down the centre aisle, with the satchel slung over his shoulder, and a nasty gash cutting across his cheek.
It's good to see you too, my friend, although unfortunately I've awoken with some loss of memory. 6 months' worth, to be exact.
He clasped his comrade's hand, and motioned to the satchel Poole set beside his pallet.
I recognise my bag. Thank you for returning it to me, and I see you've suffered an injury during the battle as well.
A minor one. Poole frowned at Miss Chalmers.
You look exhausted, beautiful but exhausted. You promised me when I left that you'd rest. Clearly you haven't.
You do reprimand a lady with such sweet words, Captain. Smiling, she wiped the dagger she'd shaved him with, then tucked it back with the rest of his belongings before asking his friend, "How did your meeting with Wellington go?"
Yes, I would like to hear about it too. Harry pointed to the three-legged stool at the end of his pallet. Take a seat. My meeting went very well.
Poole dragged the stool up and sat as he eyed him.
Wellington is in rather good spirits following the sound thrashing we gave the French. He also handed me your official papers for leave. They're inside your bag, and lucky devil, you've been given 2 months. Not surprising, though. It's been a year since your last visit home.
Oh, please excuse me, gentlemen. I shall leave you two to catch up while I see to this water. Miss Chalmers swished outside with the basin, and his heart wrenched as she disappeared.
Remain calm, old chap.
Poole clasped his shoulder.
She's not going far. I don't remember her, and yet I also do.
He thumped his chest and got his ticker beating properly.
What can you tell me about her? Well, you told me that you never thought it would happen, that you would find someone like her so far from England, or during a war to end all wars.
Poole removed his riding gloves, stuffed them in the pocket of his regimental breeches, then continued.
I could tell you more, but it would be best if you remembered the rest on your own. If it helps, though, you called her name constantly while in the throes of your fever. I can't remember her blasted name. Speak it now, I beg of you. It's Julia.
He held his breath as he allowed her name to flow through his mind. It rang no bells, and with more frustration pounding through him, he muttered,
She and her family will soon be travelling back to England. I need to be on the same ship as her. I'm aware she'll be sailing soon.
A wink from Poole.
And fear not, I already have a plan in motion.
Major Trentbury. Pushing his spectacles to the bridge of his nose, an older man with silver hair tinging the sides of his dark head halted at his bedside.
Yes, do I know you?
I'm Professor Charles Chalmers. The man stuck out his hand, which Harry eagerly shook.
It's wonderful to meet you, Professor.
Right, yes. The gentleman frowned. I'm so sorry about your injury. My daughter gave me the good news that you're alert again, although unfortunately without your memories of these past 6 months.
That's a jolly nuisance for you.
The man's kind eyes softened.
You and I have worked together since your arrival at St. Vincent's, and I would even go so far as to say that we're good friends. Thank you for coming to see me. This is all rather strange, having a sense of knowing someone, yet their name and any memories of them are missing.
Even though he recalled none of his time with Julia's father, he still sensed a strong tie to the man. He fully believed they were good friends. He motioned to Poole.
I take it you've met the captain?
Yes, Poole and I are well acquainted. A chuckle as the professor perched on his bedside, his blue waistcoat buttoned over top of a white shirt and black trousers. I've already told Poole this news, but I'll inform you too, Major. The chief engineers, Fletcher and Jones, no longer have any need for me to remain, and since I have several personal projects I've been wishing to get back to in England, my family and I are leaving.
Professor, Poole said as he arched a brow, since we spoke I've done some investigating. There is a British naval ship departing Lisbon in a week's time for England. I can organise passage for you and your family, as well as for myself and the Major. Obviously I can't leave my friend floundering without his memories, and since Wellington has given me a few weeks' leave, I'm going to travel home too. Does that suit you, having passage on the same ship as us?
That would be superb, Captain. A beaming smile.
Book the passage. The plan is set.
Poole clapped Harry on the shoulder.
Thank you, my friend.
Julia returned with a tray holding a plate of hot food and a goblet of wine, and set the tray on his lap. This meal was made by Mrs. Alvarez, and it's a delicious pork and apple pie, with roasted potatoes and parsnips. She glanced at her father and Poole. Mrs. Alvarez is outside serving at a trestle table if you're both hungry.
I adore her food.
The professor bounded to his feet, and he and Poole disappeared out the tent flap, the men chatting spiritedly. He breathed in the rich, savoury aroma of the pie. The vegetables glistened with butter, the parsnips too, but it was the woman who'd brought him the meal who he needed most of all right now, not food.
Please stay while I eat.
Of course, but eat slowly. She removed cutlery from her apron pocket, and once seated beside him, handed him the utensils. You mustn't forget that this is your first meal in 2 days, and your belly won't be used to such a large consumption of food.
Whatever did I do without you?
He swept one hand around the back of her head and drew her closer, until her lips were a mere breath away from his.
I want to eat you, not this meal.
Harry! She gasped his name, then snagged his fork and stuck some pie into his mouth. A little less talk from you.
I've learnt your name.
He moaned his approval for the divine food, although he'd rather have had her lips on his. From my father or from Poole?
Julia.
He grinned as he said her name. Aren't you clever? She smiled. It would have been Poole who blabbed. Am I right?
You are.
With her close once again, his soul eased. Chapter 19. Almost a week later, Julia bumped about on the squabs of the coach father had hired as they travelled the rutted road from Quebeco to Lisbon. All their possessions had been collected from St. Vincent's Fort and loaded on the carriage racks, along with Harry's possessions too. You're very quiet, Julia. In her olive travelling gown with long sleeves hemmed in layers of lace, Una patted her hand from beside her. If you've changed your mind and wish to admit to the Major that Jamie doesn't exist, then your father and I shall stand by your side.
Yes, we shall, her father intoned from the seat across from her.
No, I'm not changing my mind on that issue, but thank you both all the same. Yesterday, after Harry had been released from the infirmary, she'd changed into Jamie's attire, pinned her hair underneath a brown cap, and smeared coal dust on her jaw and cheeks, before asking father to introduce her to Harry as Jamie. It was important that since he didn't recall her ruse, that she be able to enjoy the use of it in the future, possibly even on board the ship.
If you change your mind...
Father tugged on the tails of his blue silk waistcoat, buttoned over a white embroidered shirt, his white cravat knotted at his neck.
As a family, we shall continue to weather any storms that arise together.
I need Jamie from time to time. Twisting her gloved fingers in her full red skirts, she turned her attention out the partially open window. Harry sat atop his mount in his uniform of royal blue, silver and white, his sabre secured at his hip, and his golden hair cut shorter by Mrs. Alvarez, who'd been delighted to bring out her bronze-pivoted scissors when Harry had asked her if there was a barber in the village he might visit for a trim. The elderly lady had sat him on a stool outside the infirmary and chatted away as she'd seen to the chore. As if he knew her thoughts were on him, he glanced her way from atop his horse, his amber gaze colliding with hers, his leather riding gloves straining over his knuckles. His cheekbones seemed sharper in the late afternoon light, his lips more sensual, and his eyes blazing with barely restrained need. He nudged his horse closer to the coach and called out,
Is all well?
She nodded a silent yes in answer.
We're halting on the rise up ahead. You'll be able to stretch your legs and enjoy the view soon.
Thank you, she called back. Within minutes, Harry and Poole brought their horses to a halt near the headland overlooking the waters of the Rio Tejo, where it met the Atlantic Ocean. Their driver slowed their coach and rattled to a stop at the side of the road. The man bounded down from his perch, set the step in place, and opened the door. Father stepped clear first, offered Una a hand down, then her. Thank you. She kissed Father and Una on the cheek. I love you both. You know that, don't you?
Of course we do.
A smile as Father shooed her away with a flick of his fingers. Una and I will stay close to the coach. Enjoy a stroll. I'd like that. Holding her broad-brimmed hat atop her head, she walked through the grass to a quiet spot under an elm tree, which had begun to lose its foliage, the brown and burnt orange leaves blowing across the dusty road as the breeze whipped through. They'd well and truly left the rolling hills and rocky outcroppings of the central peninsula behind, the bustling port city of Lisbon lying directly below the headland. Here, the land swept down in undulating hills to the rippling blue waters of the harbour below. Dozens of ships dotted the bay, this port a hive of activity.
There's our British naval ship at berth.
Harry stepped around the trunk and motioned toward the three-mast vessel in port, with seamen heaving crates up the gangplank.
She set sail at midnight.
Yes, and in 7 or 8 days we'll be home, back on English soil. She longed to return to the countryside where she and father lived. Their home was only a day's ride from the Scottish borders where Una lived in her glorious little cottage. Harry glanced back at the coach where Poole now conversed with father.
"Is everything all right with Jamie?" he asked as he returned his gaze to her. "He doesn't wish to stretch his legs?"
"Jamie is asleep, and we decided not to wake him." Before leaving Quebeco, they'd bundled pillows under a blanket on one bench, so it had appeared as if Jamie slept, just in case Harry or Poole looked inside the carriage.
"Lucky lad. I wouldn't mind a restful sleep right now."
"Is your head bothering you?" She pushed off the trunk and touched the back of his head, the lump less swollen, although the spot was still heavily bruised.
"No, and I adore the way you fuss over me."
He caught her hand, and smiling, pressed a kiss to her gloved knuckles.
"Would you care to join me for a short walk? I need to speak to you about a private matter, one which I don't wish for anyone to overhear."
"No one can overhear us here."
"Yes, but I'd still like more privacy than what this spot allows."
He looped her hand through his bent arm, and guided her down a trail leading along the slope, and when they reached a large flat boulder out of sight of everyone, he gestured for her to sit. She did, and he eased down beside her.
"I've recalled a memory. I thought you should know."
He stuffed his leather riding gloves in his pocket, his amber gaze darkening as it remained locked on hers. "Oh, you have?" Her pulse raced. "A good memory or a bad one?"
"An intriguing one."
Taking her hand again, he slowly pulled off one of her gloves, one finger at a time before he spread her hand over his upper thigh.
"Last night I awoke from a vivid dream, whereby I was in your chamber. We kissed, rather passionately. Then when I leaned against the wall, I must have knocked something which caused a hidden door to open."
"I see." She quirked a brow. "Do you remember anything else?"
"No, but I am constantly bombarded by the urge to drag you into my arms, so I might have my wicked way with you."
He skimmed his hands over her waist, lifted her, and set her directly on his lap. Her pulse sped to a roaring trot.
"Julia, all I can think about is touching you, kissing you, making you mine."
"You have a lady awaiting you back in England."
"I beg to disagree."
He cupped her face in his hands and drew her gently forward. Then he covered her mouth with his mouth, and from one mind-bending moment to the next, swarmed her senses with a sizzling kiss. Every inch of her heated, burned, and throbbed to get closer to him. "Harry!" She gasped his name.
"When I'm near you, I can barely hold my desires at bay." He caressed her sides, roamed down over her hips, and lifted her even higher on his lap. "Do you feel our connection? Have we been lovers?"
"We've spent nights together, holding each other, kissing and talking." She couldn't keep that particular truth from him any longer, and so she wrapped her arms around his neck and held on. "Unfortunately, we are from 2 different worlds."
"No, we are from the same world, just different places."
He kissed her again, his breath mingling seductively with hers.
"For the record, my precious siren, I intend on making you mine, and when I do, I surely won't forget it. You have been warned."
"For the record, my hussar, I intend on steering well clear of you, and I'll ensure you don't forget that either. You have been warned."
"Woman, I do love a challenge."
"Then consider one issued." A challenge she would win. For his sake, it was time she let him go. Their time together had never been meant to last beyond the battle. Chapter 20. Several hours later, as the high tide rose at midnight and they sailed out of Lisbon, Harry stood at the stern as hundreds of emotions thrummed so strongly through him. They'd all boarded the naval ship captained by Commander Owenley and been given cabins below deck, his directly across the tight passageway from Julia's, the lady in question having hidden herself away after their challenging conversation atop the bluff. He'd scared her with his words, although he wouldn't allow her to remain scared for long. Nor would he allow her to evade him either. Since Poole wouldn't enlighten him any further about his relationship with Julia, he intended on enlightening himself. Drat his friend, saying it was all for his own good, that he needed to recall his memories without any further aid from him. He stormed across the deck and ducked down the companionway and halted outside her door. He was desperate to bang it down and demand more answers. He barely restrained from doing so. Not tonight, though. She needed time, and such an action wouldn't aid him at present, not until he'd uncovered more. Perhaps banging his head against the wall might restore some of his lost memories? A man could only hope. Growling under his breath, he stalked into his cabin, closed the door, and shucked his uniform. In naught but his bare skin, he slumped onto his mattress and thumped his pillow as he settled his head on it. The ship creaked and groaned, and the indigo silk bedshades over his head fluttered with the ship's movement. With thoughts only of her storming through his mind, he struggled to fall asleep, and when he finally did, his dreams were filled with sweet images of her once more. In the morning, when he stirred, his heart pounded with need. For her. Always for her. He pushed from the bed, opened his beloved trunk which had been collected from St. Vincent's, and shrugged into a white lawn shirt which he left open at the neck. Then he pulled on tight-fitting black breeches, which held a golden strip along the side seam down both legs. Mid-calf Hessian boots tugged on, he strapped his sabre to his right hip, and slotted his pistol under his waistband on his left hip. He wouldn't don his uniform today, or perhaps even tomorrow, maybe not even until he left the ship once they reached port in London. Today he needed to be Harry. Just Harry. In front of his wash basin under the salt-encrusted port window, he worked soap into a foam and smeared his jaw with bubbles. Dagger in hand, he swiped his bristles away and dabbed the remaining soap clear with a cloth before sheathing his dagger at his wrist. He nabbed a white neckcloth from his trunk and, with it in hand, unbolted his door. Across the darkened passageway, Julia stepped clear and closed her door. She lifted her chin and gasped as she met his gaze, her beautiful brown eyes going wide, then her lashes fluttering down and back up again. She plastered herself back against the dark wood of her door, her sight narrowing in on the exposed skin of his neck. Her breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling swiftly. I didn't expect to see you so soon, Major Trentbury." Since she seemed to be enjoying the view of his neck, he stuffed his neckcloth in his pocket and closed his door. The ship rose suddenly at the bow, dumped down, and he lurched forward, barely catching her around the waist before she got flung to the floor.
"Are you all right?"
he asked as he set her back on her feet. "Yes." A breathy answer as she stared into his eyes, her golden locks falling in loose waves all about her face, her white lacy shawl having slipped from her shoulders and now lying looped over her wrists from behind, her burgundy empire gown a vivid splash of colour in the gloomy dark. With trembling fingers, she lifted a hand and ran a finger along his skin exposed by the V of his shirt. She wore no gloves, and with her fingers on him so intimately, he shuddered with need.
"How did you sleep?" he asked gruffly.
"As well as can be. And you?"
"I dreamed of you." The honest truth, which he had no desire to sugarcoat for her. "I need you."
"Oh, how, interesting."
Her chest rose and fell with her quickened breathing. "Only interesting."
Slowly he ran his fingers through her fair tresses, then opened one long curl like a fan and settled it over the upper swell of her left breast, her neckline sweeping dangerously low. "Harry?" She wet her lips, her gaze on his mouth. "Please cease looking at me as if you wish to devour me."
"You say one thing, but your eyes say another."
He caressed her lower lip with his thumb, his body throbbing with need as he pressed her against the wall, his hips firm against her hips. Dipping his head, he brushed his mouth across her mouth, and when she stopped breathing altogether, he lingered, going slower, sucking on her lower lip.
"Kiss me back, my love,"
he murmured against her mouth. "We're in the middle of the passageway." Yet she touched her tongue to his, and a heady wave of pleasure swamped him, along with a healthy dose of primal need as she suddenly delved deeper and explored his mouth so beautifully. Boom! Wood splintered across the companionway and dinged off the steps. The ship tilted sharply. Drat, their ship must be under attack. He held onto her tight as he pulled her up the steps, right past the rubble. On the foredeck, officers bellowed and mayhem ensued. Sailors scurried about as the cannons were fed. "Incoming!" one of the crew yelled from the crow's nest. He pushed Julia onto the ground and covered her with his body, as a ball hit the water just off their bow and sent a wave whooshing high over them. Their 70-gun frigate boomed with responding fire. Swiftly he lifted her to her feet and pressed her against one wall before raising a hand to his brow and searching the waters. A warship flying the French colours approached off their port side at full speed. "The French have lost the war on land, but it appears they now wish to strike by sea." "What do we do?" Julia gripped his shoulders and peered around his arm as she eyed the man-o'-war closing in, its weight equal to theirs. "Our English naval fleet is far stronger than theirs, although unfortunately we're a single lone ship at sea which has already been struck." A second broadside hit on their port side, and the ship shuddered. Their crew readied their guns for fire, and as the balls shot from the cannons, their ship swayed with a sharp tilt. He scooped Julia into his arms and raced toward the boat on the starboard side, which was thankfully already being readied for lowering. Portugal's coastline rose a half-mile distant, and an officer herded civilians into it. 2 of the crew took the oars as he settled her safely inside. "You'll be safer back on Allied soil than these seas. When you reach the beach, find the closest fort, and I'll meet you there." "I don't want to be cast adrift without you." "I'll find your family and get them on the next boat. Don't fear for me. I'll never leave you, not now, not ever." He caught the back of her head, and with his gaze locked on hers, spoke directly from his heart. "Julia, I mightn't have all my memories, but deep in my heart I know that I love you. Stay in the boat and remain safe. I will find you, and when I do, I will make you mine again." "I love you too," she sniffed, tears pooling in her eyes. She clutched his shirt front. "You'd better keep your word, Major." "Lower the boat!" Commander Owenley yelled as he raised a hand to his second mate. The boat jerked as it got lowered over the side, and he lost his hold on Julia just as she lost her hold on him. She waved to him frantically as the crewmen thrust their oars. "Harry, wait!" He gripped the side of the ship and leaned out to hear her better. Only cannon fire soared from their enemy, and their guns boomed, obliterating anything she said. Smoke plumed from their artillery as a second warship approached. "Bourbon is on his way." Poole slid in beside him with a telescope. He lifted the scope to his eye, and indeed spotted the Cobra's colours flying with Bourbon standing at the helm of his vessel, his guns aimed at the French. Bourbon fired, and their own English cannons rocked the ship as balls of fire shot across the sea, and joined the Cobra's fire which hit the French frigate. Their enemy's crossfire arced directly toward them, and slammed into the top of their mizzenmast. It cracked, the square-rigged sails thumping onto the deck in a blaze of fire. More smoke billowed. More fire shot from the Cobra. The French warship lurched under the impact of Bourbon's attack, and it suddenly heaved bow up, then groaned as water gushed inside. Their enemy's vessel sank with huge waves rolling out. Their crew cheered, and Julia screamed. Her small boat pitched sideways and rolled in the wash of waves. It dumped those on board into the ocean. He tore off his boots and weapons, just as Poole did the same. Then the 2 of them bounded up onto the railed edge and dove. The stormy waves closed over his head. He kicked downward into the murky depths, seeking the only woman he would ever love, one thought piercing like a dagger through his head. She couldn't swim. Chapter 21. Julia's head shattered with pain as the turbulent waters of the ocean surged and dragged her under. Crashing waves tossed her about, so deep, endlessly deep. Her heavy skirts had wrapped tightly around her legs, and she tried to wrench them free, but black hazed her vision. No, she couldn't swim, but so too she wouldn't give up her life to these waters, not as she was just beginning to live it. An arm cinched around her waist and sent her last breath gushing from her. She faltered as Harry reeled her around, and she stared into the most piercing amber eyes. He covered her mouth with his and shared his breath, then firming his hold on her, he kicked them both upward through the swirling current, and in a flurry of bubbles she broke the surface with him and gasped for breath. "Harry?" "Yes, it's me." He cupped the back of her head, drew her flush up against him, and muttered, "As soon as I hit the water, more memories returned. I remembered you couldn't swim. Then I recalled the moment I found you at Sabral in the tent. You little vixen, you don't have a brother." "Oh, so you remembered that, huh?"
You were down so deep, and I feared I mightn't be able to reach you in time.
His golden hair lay flat against his scalp as he treaded water for them both. I'm so sorry. She wrapped her arms around his neck. He was here, his body solid, his hold unwavering, and she wanted him, with a desperation she would never be able to contain. Do you remember any of the nights we spent together?
Not as yet, but I intend for you to aid me in remembering them by recreating those moments.
He swept her hair back from her forehead and slowly smiled.
Miss Julia Chalmers, I can't live without you, and I have no intention of doing so. With that being the case, and the fact that I don't intend on taking no for an answer, will you do me the greatest honour of marrying me?
Yes. She desperately wanted to be his wife. Have you remembered that the Professor isn't my real father, that he adopted me?
I remember that. There are bits and pieces I recall.
He grinned, so devilishly.
I don't care about your past, only about who you are now.
Tears misted her gaze, and she wanted to cry, because there was no man who held her heart other than him. She kissed him, her heart filling with wonder as he kissed her deeply in return. Major Harry Trentbury, she whispered against his lips. I can't wait to be your wife.
Chapter 22. 4 days later, after they'd limped back into Lisbon and Commander Owenley had completed repairs on the naval ship, they continued on their journey to England. Now, Harry walked Julia backward toward his bed and toppled her onto his mattress, his cabin door firmly bolted shut. He rolled them both until she came up over top of him, his hands on her hips as he held her steady. I still can't believe you asked me to marry you. She traced a finger over his lips. There is no other for me, other than you. The Professor had been ecstatic upon hearing of their impending nuptials, Una too. He captured her mouth and kissed her deeply, his hunger for her an unstoppable beat in his blood. This woman had tempted him beyond his endurance, but now he could finally give in to his desires. Under his breath he muttered, By the way, you are never to dress as Jamie again. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. She tapped his nose. That's my precious siren. Grinning, he held her tightly to him, while she nuzzled his neck. Say yes, she murmured. I would say yes to anything you offered me. He held perfectly still as she licked over his thumping pulse point. You are beautiful, Miss Chalmers. I want to help you recall your lost memories. That is most certainly a yes. Go right ahead. I am at your disposal. She wrapped her hand around his neck, leaned forward and kissed him with a mind-shattering headiness that had him gasping for more when she pulled back. Under his breath he growled, Don't stop. Are you always going to be this impatient? She bit into his lower lip, a playful bite, but a hungry one all the same. He licked her neck, then sucked on the sensitive skin where her pulse pounded. When she moaned her enjoyment, he speared his fingers deep into her hair and got lost in the wonder of her sweet mouth. His blood roared, his passion barely restrained as such bliss burned through him. Shooting sparks of colour suddenly blazed behind his eyes, and a kaleidoscope of images fizzled to the surface. Lost memories hazed his sight, returning with full force. He remembered everything, every single moment of the 6 months he'd lost, along with each and every wondrous night they'd spent together. He tossed her onto her back, seized her mouth, and drowned himself in the incredible taste of her. I remember everything. You do? Yes, every last detail. I wish to live my life with you, to always have you at my side, to start a family with you, and to cherish each and every one of our children born to us. I would like that too. Everything you just said. All of it. Kiss me, Julia. She did, deeply. Then she unbuttoned his shirt, pushed the sleeves down his arms, and stroked his chest. She traced along the ridges of his abs, then smiled. You are going to make the perfect husband, my hussar. I shall endeavour to be the best that ever lived. He skated one lone finger down her neck, then he kissed her, his tongue sweeping over hers in a heated caress that had her arching her body into his. He'd fallen in love with the woman he adored, with every breath in his body, and now with the last of his memories returned, he never intended to forget a single moment with her ever again. She was his, the only woman he wished to love and protect for the rest of his life. She would be his future wife and engineering cohort. He couldn't wait. Life was about to get very interesting with his precious siren at his side.
Epilogue. England, 6 months later. Covered head to toe in splatters of mud, Julia could barely contain her excitement as she bounded from her mare, the wide forested field she'd ridden across a little waterlogged after the rain they'd had. She secured her mount to a hitching post, right next to the stone building which Father and Harry called their workshop. Harry had purchased this land which lay directly beside Father's property in the country. Then they'd laid down iron rails for their coming venture. Una stepped in beside her as Father jumped from the engine of the locomotive he and Harry had built these past 6 months. Leaning one hand against the front of the engine, Father beamed. "Well, I'm rather convinced this is the fastest locomotive that's ever been built. What do you two ladies think?" "I certainly couldn't keep up with you, and I was on horseback." She'd raced around the field as Father had chugged along. Not that any of them would tell Harry that when he returned from town with the additional iron they required. Her husband would have an attack of the heart if he ever caught wind of her riding a horse, since she was pregnant, now 4 months along. Una wiped a mud splatter from Julia's cheek, her smile wide. "My dear child, men believe ladies should do nothing but sit and embroider when they're expecting. I personally believe so much more is possible, provided one takes care, which I know you will." "I will cease riding once my belly gets too big." She could still sit quite comfortably atop her horse, although her breeches were certainly a little too snug around her middle. "Thank you for keeping my secret."
"What secret?" Harry muttered as he planted his hands on his hips, the wind blowing his golden locks about and plastering his black shirt to his broad chest.
"Oh my, when did you get back?"
"Have you been galloping about these fields when I expressly told you not to?"
He stormed toward her, caught her in his arms and tipped her back off her feet.
"I'll have the truth, wife." "Well, I do believe Una and I shall leave the two of you to your argument and see if the cook has begun preparations for dinner. I'm feeling rather hungry."
Father chuckled as he threaded Una's hand through his bent arm and steered her up the hill toward hers and Harry's country manor, Father's house just visible through the trees on the next hilly rise beyond their home.
"I'm feeling rather hungry myself, but not for food." Still growling, Harry held her off her feet. "My love, I want you, quite desperately."
We are now all alone."
She pointed to the trees behind the workshop where they'd snuck off to countless times since their wedding. When they'd arrived home, Harry had introduced her to his family, then with all speed organised their church wedding, which had taken place before their loved ones a mere 3 weeks following their return. Afterward, he'd promptly sold his commission, and their lives had forever changed following his purchase of this land. Touching her nose to his nose, she hooked her arms around his neck. "The question is, my husband, can you get us over there as fast as the engine you and Father recently built?" "You helped build it as well, and yes, do time me."
He swung her into his arms and bounded through the grass. Giggling, she held on to him as he dashed through the trees, and once deep within the cover of the grove, he laid her on the springy grass and united them both in a delicious storm of loving. With breathtaking speed, rapture overtook her. Love. Theirs had survived a war, a battle both on land and at sea, but now their hearts were entwined, never to be separated again. Being with her husband was an adventure she'd embraced, fully and completely. He was hers. Her hussar, until the end of time. Author's note, a must-read. I had so much fun writing this story, bringing to life the Battle of Sobral in Portugal, which occurred on the 13th to 14th of October 1810, much as I described in this story. During the battle, the Imperial French army led by Marshal André Masséna, along with Jean Andoche Junot's 8th Corps, attempted to take Lisbon by way of the lines of Torres Vedras being constructed and defended by Arthur Wellesley, Viscount Wellington, and his Anglo-Portuguese army. Both sides engaged in heavy fighting on both days, with Junot's troops seizing an outpost belonging to Brett Spencer's 1st Infantry Division, but they were quickly ejected from their short hold by a British counterattack. The French weren't aware of the construction of the lines until shortly before the attack, when Masséna realised what a strong defensive position Wellington had built. With it being too strong to crack, Masséna elected to retreat. During the Battle of Sobral, Casualties and losses for the French numbered 277, and for the English-Portuguese 206. A very small number compared to some of the Peninsular Wars, in which thousands of soldiers lost their lives. Even after the French had retreated from Portugal, strengthening of the lines continued in case of further attacks. The work was supervised by Lieutenant Colonel Sir Richard Fletcher, along with Major John Thomas Jones. 11 other British officers, 4 Portuguese Army engineers, and a few others assisted. 2 years later, in 1812, a staggering 34,000 workmen and soldiers continued to work on the project as an expansion took place. The cost of the construction came to around £200,000, which was in fact one of the least expensive but most remunerative military investments in history. Today the lines still stand, or at least substantial portions of them do. There has of course been heavy decay, but conservation and restoration work has been undertaken in recent years, and the lines are often walked by locals, visitors and tourists to the area. After writing this story, I do feel that Captain Bradley Poole needs his own luscious lady and book. Raise your hand if you agree? Yes, my hand is waving frantically too. Thank you all for joining me on this amazing adventure with Harry and Julia in Portugal. It has been my absolute pleasure to give them a story worthy of their adventurous spirits. This story is woven with as much accuracy to the period and locations as possible, but any mistakes made are mine alone. The end. This has been To Love During War by Joanne Wadsworth. Narrated by Catherine Bilson. Copyright 2019. Audiobook production copyright 2020. Coming next in this sweet Regency Tales series is My Secret and the Earl, Book 4. You can find more information about all Joanne's books by visiting her website at joannewadsworth.com.